It was my first day in the field as a park ranger. My first duty station was in one of the most remote regions in the state. The sky over Montana hung heavy with storm clouds, casting darkness over the endless trees. The mountains lined the horizon, their peaks disappearing into the sky. I had never seen mountains so big, jagged, and imposing. I was eager to make a good impression, eager to prove that I belonged here. This job had always been my dream. But as I drove up the narrow dirt road to the ranger station, a knot of unease began to creep into my stomach. The isolation of this place was palpable, even from my car. The silence of the wilderness pressed in on me, broken only by the wind against the tree branches or the distant cry of an animal. Civilization was far away, and for the first time since taking this job, I realized how truly alone I was going to be. But despite this, I felt confident and excited to put my new training to use. The ranger station came into view, smoke from the chimney rising into the air. It was nestled at the edge of Pine Creek Forest. The station was small, squat, and unassuming. Honestly, more of a cabin than a headquarters. Standing by the entrance was Earl Bennett, a burly man in his mid-50s with graying hair poking out from under his hat, and a weather-beaten face that had clearly seen its share of harsh winters. He didn't smile when he saw me approaching, and he skipped the pleasantries. "You're late," he grunted, glancing at his watch. I swallowed hard, feeling my confidence suddenly turn into nervousness. "Sorry, sir, the roads." "The roads are always like that. It's the middle of nowhere, Montana, kid." He cut me off. "You'll learn soon enough. Out here, you better be prepared for anything." I nodded, feeling small under his stern gaze, like a child getting a good lecture from his parents. "Well, come on then," he said as he motioned for me to follow him into the station. As I entered, I spotted another ranger sitting quietly in the corner, staring out the window at the coming storm. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with long black hair tied back in a ponytail and a calm expression on his face. Earl didn't introduce him immediately. The station was simple. A few desks, a gun safe, a kitchen, a radio room, and sleeping quarters in the back. Earl handed me a map of the region. "Your job is to patrol this area. You're going to check for signs of poaching, illegal campsites, and anything else that doesn't belong. Poaching's been a problem around here for a while. Keep your eyes open, learn your area, and don't ever let yourself get too comfortable." I nodded, unfolding the map and scanning the area. My territory stretched deep into the dense forests, far beyond where most people would dare to venture. "And him?" I asked, motioning toward the man by the window. Earl glanced over. "That's Daniel Black Elk. He's the quiet type, but he knows these woods better than anyone. If he gives you guidance, you better listen up. His family's been on this land for generations." I extended my hand to Daniel. "Tom Carter, good to meet you, Daniel." Daniel's grip was firm but gentle, his eyes never leaving mine as we shook hands. "Daniel Black Elk," he said in a voice that was low and smooth. "Welcome to Pine Creek." Earl wasted no time getting down to business. He spread a map of the area across the table and tapped at it with his thick fingers. "This is your territory now. The Pine Creek region is thousands of acres of forest, mountain, rivers, and lakes. You'll be responsible for these areas, keeping an eye out for anything unusual." I nodded, trying to absorb the sheer scale of the territory. "Anything in particular that I should be looking for?" "Everything," Earl said flatly. "This ain't some well-maintained national park. It's rough terrain. Weather changes fast, animals aren't always friendly, and the nearest help is hours away. If you get in trouble out there, you're on your own, so don't get into trouble." His tone left no room for argument, and I nodded again. He wasn't exaggerating. The sheer remoteness of the place was beginning to sink in. "What about the poaching?" I asked. "Who's behind it?" Earl leaned back in his chair, a grim look on his face. "Oh, locals mostly. Some of them hunt for sport, some for money. Wolves, elk, bears, you name it. They know the forest better than most, and they don't take kindly to us rangers poking around their business." I frowned. "Sounds like it could get dangerous." "It can," Earl said and then looked out the window, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "But there is worse out there than poachers." His words hung in the air like a fog, and for a moment a heavy silence settled over the room. Daniel glanced at Earl but said nothing. There was an unspoken tension between the two of them, something that I wasn't privy to yet. "Like what?" I asked, breaking the silence. Earl's eyes flicked back to me hard and cold. "Just keep your wits about you and don't go out there trying to be a hero and get yourself or anybody else hurt." The first week of patrols was uneventful, but the forest had a way of unsettling me even when nothing happened. The trees loomed tall and silent, their trunks dark and twisted, like ancient giants frozen in time. Every rustle of leaves or a snap of a twig set my nerves on edge, and I constantly found myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. I reminded myself that I would get used to it with time. Daniel accompanied me on a few of my first patrols, guiding me through the more difficult terrain. He rarely spoke unless it was necessary, but when he did, it was always to point out something that I would have otherwise missed, like animal tracks or a hole to avoid stepping in. His knowledge of the land was impressive, and though he was quiet, I appreciated his presence. There was something calming about him, like he was in tune with the land in a way that I couldn't yet comprehend. I felt safe with him. One afternoon while we were hiking through a particularly dense section of the forest, I asked more about him and what his story was. "My family's been here for centuries," Daniel said, his voice low. "Long before the park was established, before the settlers came. My people have always been the stewards of this land. We know its secrets." "Secrets?" I asked, curious. Daniel paused, looking out at the trees with a distant expression. "The land remembers. It has its own memory and its own spirits. There are more things out here than just man and animals." I felt a chill run down my spine at his words, but I wasn't sure if he was being serious or if it was just a part of his culture. Maybe he was just speaking metaphorically. Still, there was something about the way that he spoke, so matter-of-fact, that made me believe him. That evening after we had returned to the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow felt like it was something following me, and every gust of wind carried whispers to my ears. I had been on edge already, and the conversation with Daniel didn't help. Earl brushed off my concerns when I mentioned to him what Daniel had said about there being more in the forest than just man or animal. "Ah, that's just first week jitters," he said. "The forest can get under your skin if you let it. Just stick to your patrols and don't go looking for trouble." We all felt like that when we were new, and don't go listening to none of Daniel's superstitions. The guy knows his stuff, but he can get a little out there, if you know what I mean. I wanted to believe him, but the unease gnawed at me, a constant presence at the back of my mind. A few days later, I was out on patrol by myself, covering the western section of the forest. The day was overcast, and the clouds hung low and heavy, casting everything in a dull gray light. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, and the forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife absent. I vaguely recalled something in my training about when the forest goes silent. As I made my way through a clearing, I spotted something unusual near the edge of the tree line. At first, I thought it was just a pile of leaves or debris, but as I got closer, I realized it was the mangled remains of an animal. My heart sank as I knelt down to examine the scene. The animal, what looked like had been a deer, had been completely ripped apart, its flesh torn and shredded in a way that didn't seem natural. The bite marks were too large and jagged to be from any predator that I knew of in the area. I had seen wolf kills before, and this wasn't the same. It was savage and brutal, almost as if whatever had killed it had done so for sport rather than for food. The ground around the carcass was disturbed, the grass flattened and trampled as if there had been some kind of struggle. But what stood out to me the most were the tracks. They were large, far larger than any wolf or bear, and they were shaped different. The toes were elongated, almost claw-like, and they dug deep into the soil, leaving deep impressions. My stomach churned as I took a few steps back, my hand instinctively going to the radio on my belt. "Earl," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found something. Looks like a poaching site maybe, but something's not right." "What do you mean, not right?" Earl's voice crackled over the radio. "The animal, it's been torn apart. And the tracks, I've never seen anything like them. They're freaking huge." There was a long pause on the other end, and when Earl finally spoke again, his voice was tense. "Where are you?" "I'm about a mile west of the old logging road near the clearing." "Head back to the station now." The urgency in his voice sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, and I didn't waste any time. As I turned to head back, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something was moving between the trees, darting from trunk to trunk with a speed that made my heart skip a beat. I froze, my eyes scanning the dense forest, but whatever it was had already disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my pulse pounding in my ears, but there was no further movement. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, a heavy weight pressing down on me as I made my way back to the station as fast as I could. When I had returned to the station, Earl was waiting for me at the door, his expression unreadable. "Show me the site," he said, grabbing his rifle from the rack by the door. I nodded and led him back into the forest, my nerves still on edge from the encounter. As we approached the clearing, I pointed out the carcass and the tracks, watching as Earl knelt down to examine them. He didn't say anything for a long time, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he stood up, a grim look on his face. "Could be a bear," he said, but I could tell even he didn't believe it. "Bears don't leave tracks like that," I said quietly. Earl shot me a sharp look, but before he could respond, Daniel pulled up to the side in his truck, his face as calm and unreadable as ever. Daniel examined the site for a moment, but Earl again said, "A grizzly, I think, by the looks of it." "That's no grizzly," Daniel said softly, his eyes locked on the tracks. "That's something else." Earl's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the two of them traded a look. There was something that they weren't telling me, something they both knew but were hesitant to say out loud. "Well, what is it then?" I asked impatiently, feeling a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Daniel glanced at me. "We should head back. It's getting dark." I wanted to press him for more information, but the tone in his voice left no room for argument. We made our way back to the station in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. That night, after Earl had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with Daniel. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the fire crackled softly in the fireplace. "What's really out there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Finally he spoke, his voice low and steady. "You ever heard of a Wendigo?" I frowned. "A Wendigo, that's like an old Native American thing, right?" I asked. "It's an old legend, yes," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving the fire. "The spirit of the forest. Some say that it was once a man, a hunter who became lost in the wilderness and resorted to cannibalism to survive. But in doing so, he became something else, something cursed. The Wendigo is a creature of hunger, always starving, always hunting. It craves flesh, and once it tastes it, it becomes insatiable." I felt a chill crawl up my spine at his words, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "So you're saying that's what's out there?" Daniel finally looked at me, his expression serious. "I don't know, but there are stories. The Wendigos can mimic voices, lure people into the woods. It's fast, faster than anything natural. And once it sets its sight on you, it won't stop until it's fed." I swallowed hard, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "And if it finds you?" Daniel's gaze was unwavering. "You run, you don't stop, you don't look back, and you pray it loses interest." His words hung in the air like a dark omen, and as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from these shadows of the forest. The next morning, Earl ordered a full patrol of the area. He was visibly tense, though he tried to maintain his usual gruff demeanor. We split up. Earl took the north and I took the west, and Daniel headed east. As I made my way through the forest, the weight of Daniel's story pressed on me like a heavy stone, and I honestly began to rethink my career choice. The forest felt different today. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that kept me on edge. Every step that I took seemed too loud, the crunch of twigs under my feet echoing through the trees. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of something rotten, something that made my stomach turn. I found myself constantly scanning the trees, searching for any sign of movement. My nerves were shot, every shadow a potential threat, every gust of wind a whisper of something sinister. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead like a canopy of twisted arms. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl so deep. It was faint, so faint that I almost thought that I had imagined it. My heart leapt into my throat and I stopped in my tracks, my hand going to the gun on my hip. I listened, straining to hear it again. For a long moment there was only silence, and then from somewhere behind me came the sound of something moving through the undergrowth. It sounded fast, impossibly fast. I spun around, my pulse racing, but there was nothing there, just the trees, silent. I took a step back, my hand tightening on my gun. The growl came again, this time louder, closer. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, and I saw something moving between the trees. It was a shadow, long and gaunt, darting from trunk to trunk with a speed that made my stomach churn. I couldn't see it clearly, just flashes of pale skin, long limbs, and glowing eyes that burned with an unnatural light. The creature lunged with an inhuman grace, its body almost serpentine as it weaved between the trees. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought that I might have a heart attack. I stood frozen, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps, my gun drawn but useless in my trembling hands. For a moment I considered calling out to Earl or Daniel, but something told me that making noise would only draw it closer. And then from deep in the forest, I heard my name. Tom. The voice was faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It was Earl's voice calling to me from somewhere beyond the trees. For a moment I felt relieved. I had been found. My instincts screamed at me to run toward it, to get out of there. The voice, it sounded so real, so close. Tom, over here. I took a step forward, my mind racing, but then I paused. Earl shouldn't be this far into my section of the forest. He was supposed to be on the North Patrol, miles from here. But the voice, it sounded just like his. Tom. This time it was louder and more insistent. I took another step, my legs trembling beneath me. Something about the voice was wrong though. It sounded like Earl, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, Daniel's voice echoed in my mind. It can mimic voices, lure people into the woods. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing. It wasn't Earl, it couldn't be. Tom. The voice was closer now, but I didn't move. I couldn't move. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, and the forest around me seemed to close in, the trees towering over me. And then from behind me came a rustling sound, soft at first, but growing louder and closer. I didn't dare turn around. Every instinct in my body told me not to look, not to acknowledge whatever was behind me. But the rustling grew louder and I could feel something watching me, approaching me, something predatory. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Everything became silent. Tom, it whispered, this time directly in my ear. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back. I just ran, my feet pounding the forest floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The trees blurred past me as I sprinted through the forest, branches whipping at my face, the wind roaring in my ears. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps impossibly fast, closing the distance with terrifying speed. My legs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Somehow I made it to the edge of the forest and I stumbled into the clearing. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. When I finally looked back, the thing was gone, but the feeling of being watched still remained. I felt as if I were prey if it had just been playing with its food. When I returned to the station, Earl and Daniel were waiting for me. Earl's face was pale, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by a quiet tension that had unnerved me. He looked worried. "What happened?" Earl asked, his voice tight. I told them everything, the growl, the creature, the voice. As I spoke, Daniel's expression grew darker, his eyes narrowing in thought. Earl, however, remained silent, his jaw clenched. When I finished, the room was filled with an oppressive silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You encountered it, the Wendigo," he said, his voice low. Earl shot him a sharp look. "Oh, don't start with that bullshit." "It's not bullshit," Daniel said, his tone firm. "You saw the tracks. You heard the voice yourself once too, Earl. You know what's out there. You've always known." I looked between them, confusion and fear swirling in my mind. "What's going on? What do you mean?" Earl let out a long, weary sigh, rubbing a hand over his face. "Yeah, I heard a voice once too calling me," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "But it's just some old legend." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "And it's hunting me." Daniel nodded. "It's been here long before the park was established, long before any of us. It's a part of the land, it's tied to it, and once it sets its sights on you." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The weight of his words was clear. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "So what do I do?" Earl and Daniel exchanged a long, tense look before Daniel finally spoke. "We'll stay in groups for a few days until we figure it out." The days that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia. Every patrol felt like a death sentence, every rustle of leaves or a snap of a twig sending my heart into overdrive. The Wendigo was out there watching and waiting, and I knew that it wouldn't stop until it had what it had wanted. Me. But I wasn't going to give it the chance. I wouldn't be caught off guard. One night after a tense day of patrolling, I sat down with Daniel by the fire. The wind howled outside, but inside the station it was quiet. "Have you seen it before yourself?" I asked, breaking the silence. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his expression distant. Finally, he nodded. "Once, when I was younger, my father and I were out hunting. We thought that it was a bear at first, but when we saw it darting between the trees, well, we never spoke of it again." The fire crackled softly between us, the flames casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, I could have sworn that I heard a low growl. I didn't sleep that night, and in the morning I knew one thing for certain. The Wendigo was still out there, and it wasn't done with me yet. The atmosphere in the ranger station had become stifling. My encounter with whatever was lurking in the woods, the Wendigo or whatever it was, loomed over us like a dark cloud. We patrolled together now, never venturing into the forest alone. Daniel insisted on this, but it was clear that tension between him and Earl was mounting with each passing day. Earl was a no-nonsense type, and all the talk about the Wendigo was getting to him. He masked it with tough talk and hard looks, but I could see through it. Daniel, on the other hand, was quiet, reflective, and unnervingly calm. It was the kind of calm that made me wonder if he had already made peace with the idea that things weren't going to end well. We still had a job to do, though, and we couldn't just sit in the station. Outside, though, the usual sounds of nature were gone, replaced by an oppressive silence. Not even the wind seemed to move anymore. I often found myself glancing between the two men, feeling like I was caught in the middle of two fighting parents. One afternoon, after busting up a beaver dam, we were on our way back to the station when we came across another mutilated deer. "It's another one," Daniel said. Earl knelt beside the remnants, his face twisted in frustration. "We're chasing shadows out here," Earl muttered, standing up and wiping his hands on his pants. "This ain't no Wendigo, probably just some damn bear with a grudge." Daniel, standing a few feet away, was watching the tree line, his eyes scanning the distance as if waiting for something to emerge. When Earl's grumbling grew louder, Daniel finally spoke up. "You know that it's not a bear, Earl. You've seen the tracks." Earl shot him a sharp look. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Daniel. I know a bear when I see one. I don't need you filling the kid's head with your bullshit legends." Daniel's expression remained calm, but there was a hard edge in his voice when he responded. "This isn't about legends, it's about survival. The Wendigo is real and it's hunting us." Earl stepped closer to Daniel, his face contorted with anger. "You think I'm scared of some fairy tale? I've faced real predators, real threats. This thing, whatever it is, it doesn't scare me." Daniel didn't back down. "That's your problem, Earl. You're not scared enough." The tension between them was thick, and for a moment I thought that one of them might throw a punch. I stood there awkwardly silent, my eyes darting between the two of them, unsure of what to say. Finally, Earl snorted and stormed off toward the station. "I'm done with this shit," Earl muttered. "You two can sit around talking about monsters and fairy tales all you want. I'm going to bed." That night, Daniel and I stayed by the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the floor. The silence that followed was suffocating, but eventually I broke it. "Do you really think that we're being hunted?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't answer right away. He poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers rise up the chimney before he finally responded. "Yes," he said softly. "I think the Wendigo has chosen us. Once it sets its sights on you, there's no going back. It's patient, it waits. It wears you down." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "And how do you stop it? I mean, how do you kill it?" Daniel's eyes shot up to meet mine, and for a moment he didn't say anything. And then he shook his head. "You don't." "There has to be a way," I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. Daniel looked away, staring into the fire. "Legends say that there is, but it's dangerous. You'd have to trap it first, and that alone is nearly impossible." My pulse quickened. "Well, how do you trap it?" Daniel hesitated, as if debating whether or not to tell me. After a long pause, he sighed and leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The Wendigo fears fire. You would need to lure it into a trap with something that it wants. Flesh. And once it's close enough, you would have to burn it. But it won't be easy. It's smart, and it'll know what you're trying to do." A chill ran down my spine. "So we use ourselves as bait?" Daniel nodded grimly. "It'd be the only way." We spent the next few days preparing the trap. It was a plan born out of desperation, but it was all that we had. We set up in a narrow ravine deep in the forest, a place where the trees were thick and the ground uneven. We dug a deep pit and filled it with kindling, creating a makeshift pyre. The idea was simple. Lure the Wendigo into the hole, ignite the fire, and hope that it would be enough to kill it. Earl, despite his earlier protests, went along with the plan. His gruff exterior had been cracked, and I could see the fear in his eyes, though he had tried to hide it behind tough talk. He was desperate for it to be over. "Just make sure you don't screw this up, Tom," Earl muttered as we set the final touches on the trap. "We only get one shot at this." Daniel stood nearby, quiet as always, but there was a tension in him that I hadn't seen before. I knew that he was nervous even if he didn't show it. The sun began to set, casting darkness across the forest. The air grew colder and the wind picked up, carrying with it the familiar scent of decay that made my stomach churn. We took our positions. Daniel and I stood near the pit while Earl waited a little further back, his rifle at the ready just in case. For a long time there was nothing but silence. The forest was unnervingly still, as if holding its breath, and then from somewhere deep in the woods came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and not human. My heart raced as I gripped my gun, my eyes scanning the darkness. Daniel and I stood by the hole, waiting for our opportunity to light the fire. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then I saw it. The Wendigo. It moved between the trees with an unnatural grace, its long, gaunt limbs twisted and pale. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light and its mouth hung open, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. The sight of it made my blood run cold. It was huge, much taller than I had imagined, with a skeletal frame that seemed barely held together by its rotting flesh. Its stench filled the air, a sickly sweet smell of decay and death. It moved toward us and we waited in anticipation as it drew closer and closer to the hole. Just a little bit further, I thought to myself. And for a moment I thought that our plan might actually work. But just as the Wendigo was almost on top of the hole, Earl raised his rifle. "Earl, no!" Daniel shouted. But before he could fire, the Wendigo moved. Fast, impossibly fast. It darted toward Earl, its long arms reaching out with terrifying speed. Earl screamed, a guttural, panicked sound, but it was too late. The Wendigo slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Its claws tore into his flesh, ripping him apart with horrifying precision. Blood sprayed across the forest floor, and Earl's screams were cut short as the creature's jaws closed around his throat, tearing it out in one swift motion. I froze, my body locked in place as I watched in horror. Earl's body convulsed for a moment before going still, his blood pooling beneath him. The Wendigo stood over him, his mouth smeared with blood, its glowing eyes locked onto me. "Run," Daniel shouted, grabbing my arm and yanking me away from the screen. We bolted, sprinting through the trees as fast as we could. The Wendigo let out a bone-chilling screech, and I could hear it crashing through the growth behind us, its footsteps fast and relentless. We ran, the forest a blur around us. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't dare stop. The sound of the Wendigo's pursuit was right behind us, its screeches echoing through the trees. And then Daniel stumbled. I turned just in time to see him fall, his foot catching on a root. He hit the ground hard, and before I could reach him, the Wendigo was upon him. "Go, get to the station." I hesitated for a split second, but the sight of the Wendigo tearing into Daniel's flesh sent me into a blind panic. I turned and ran, Daniel's screams echoing in my ears as I sprinted through the forest. I burst through the door of the ranger station, slamming it shut behind me. My hands were trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood smeared across my face and clothes, not mine but Earl's and Daniel's. I stumbled to the radio, frantically calling for help. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Ranger Carter. We need immediate help at Pine Creek Forest. There's something out here, something killing us. Please send help." There was static for a moment, and then a voice crackled through the speaker. "Copy that. Stay where you are. Help is on the way." I dropped the radio and collapsed onto the floor, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. The fire in the hearth flickered weakly, casting shadows on the walls. The station felt too small, too vulnerable. The Wendigo was out there, somewhere in the darkness, and I could feel it, like a predator circling its prey. My body trembled as I stood in the middle of the room, trying to figure out what to do next. The fire cracked softly, offering little comfort. I grabbed the rifle from Earl's stash, my hands slick with sweat as I fumbled with the bullets. The radio sat on the desk, hissing with intermittent static. I had no idea how long it would take for help to arrive, or if they would even believe my frantic call. My breath was shallow and my mind raced with images of Earl's body being ripped apart. Daniel's final screams as the Wendigo closed in on him. They were gone and I was alone. And then I heard it. At first it was faint, a soft scratching like nails dragging across wood. It came from the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, listening to the sound grow louder. My mind raced. The Wendigo was here. A voice suddenly broke the silence. It was faint but unmistakable. "Tom, let me in." I froze, my eyes wide with terror. The voice was familiar. It was Daniel. "Tom," the voice came again, pleading. "Please let me in. Help me. It's out here. I'm hurt. Let me in." I wanted to believe that it was him. God, I wanted to believe that he had somehow survived, but I knew the truth. Daniel was dead. I had seen it happen. And now the Wendigo was using his voice to lure me outside. Tears welled up in my eyes as I backed away from the door, clutching the rifle to my chest. "You're not Daniel," I whispered, my voice shaking. The scratching at the door stopped, replaced by a low growl. My blood turned to ice as I realized the Wendigo knew that I wasn't going to fall for its trick. Suddenly, there was a loud bang against the door, the force of it rattling the entire station. I stumbled backward and nearly tripping over a chair as the door cracked under the pressure. The creature was trying to get in. Bang! Another hit, harder this time. The door splintered slightly, the wood cracking beneath the force of the blow. "Tom," the voice came again, this time sounding like Earl. "Open the door, I need your help." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the rifle. "No, you're not real." Bang! The door buckled and I could see a long bony claw poke through the wood, scraping along the inside of the door frame. I aimed the rifle, my hands trembling so much that I could barely keep it steady. "Get away," I shouted, my voice barely more than a whimper. The creature let out a low rumbling growl and then there was silence. The scratching stopped and for a moment I thought that it might have given up. But then from outside the window I heard it again. The voices. "Tom, come outside, it's safe now." "No, you're not real." The voices continued, calling me to come outside. I turned toward the window, my breath catching in my throat. The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of movement outside, something tall and thin between the trees. I backed away from the window, my stomach churning with dread. I knew the Wendigo was playing with me, taunting me, trying to break me down. It wanted me to open that door to step outside into the cold night where it could finish me. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life again. "Ranger Carter, hold tight. Help is inbound. ETA." The radio hissed with static, cutting off the rest of the message. But at least they were coming. I just had to survive until then. I grabbed what little ammunition that I could find and barricaded myself in the back room, blocking the door with a desk and anything else that I could move. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely load the rifle, and the constant scratching at the walls made it nearly impossible to focus. "Tom, come on kid, it's cold out here. Let me in." I clutched the rifle tighter, my back pressed against the wall as the temperature inside the cabin seemed to drop. The voices continued on for what felt like hours. My breath fogged in the air and I could feel the cold seeping in from the cracks in the windows. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the front of the station. The sound of splintering wood filled the air and I knew that it had finally broken through the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard the slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the station. They were heavy, each step causing the floorboards to creak under its weight. It was inside. I held my breath, my hands shaking as I gripped the rifle. My footsteps grew louder and closer. I could hear its breathing now, slow, ragged, and unnatural, like it was savoring the fear that it could sense in me. The creature was hunting me and it knew exactly where I was. Suddenly, there was silence. The footsteps stopped right outside the door to the back room. For a moment, I thought maybe that it hadn't seen me. Maybe it would leave, but then slowly the door began to creak, the makeshift barricade groaning under the pressure. I raised the rifle, aiming it at the door as it swung open, revealing the dark, hulking figure of the Wendigo. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, piercing through the dim light like two burning embers. Its mouth hung open, revealing its sharp, blood-stained teeth. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. and then the creature lunged. I fired the rifle, the deafening crack echoing through the small room. The bullet hit the Wendigo in the shoulder, but it barely flinched. It let out a bone-chilling screech, its long twisted arms reaching for me. I fired again, this time hitting it in the chest. The Wendigo staggered back, but it was still coming. I scrambled backward, trying to reload the rifle, but my hands were shaking so badly that I had dropped the bullets. The Wendigo lunged again, its claws swiping at me. I barely dodged in time, feeling the air whip past my face as its claws sliced through the wooden desk. I grabbed the rifle and swung it like a bat, smashing it against the creature's head. It let out another screech, staggering back toward the door. I used the brief moment of reprieve to grab more bullets and reload the rifle, my heart racing as the creature began to recover. Just as I had raised the rifle to fire again, I heard the faint sound of a helicopter in the distance. The Wendigo seemed to sense the approaching rescue as well, and it turned its head toward the window, its glowing eyes narrowing. The sound of the helicopter grew louder, and for the first time since the nightmare had begun, I felt a flicker of hope. The creature let out one final ear-piercing shriek before it turned and bolted out of the room, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. I collapsed to the floor, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. The cold air from the shattered door flooded into the cabin, but I didn't care. Within minutes, the helicopter had touched down outside the station, and several rangers and other state law enforcement officers rushed inside. They found me huddled in the back room, clutching the rifle to my chest, my eyes wide with shock. "Hey, are you okay?" one of them asked, kneeling beside me. I nodded, though I wasn't sure that I believed it myself. I was alive, but barely. The others, Earl and Daniel, they were gone. As they helped me to my feet and led me outside, I glanced back at the forest, half expecting to see the glowing eyes of the Wendigo watching me from the tree line. But there was nothing, just darkness. They transferred me to a new post near Billings, Montana, a far cry from the isolation of Pine Creek Forest. This area is more populated, filled with tourists and families enjoying the safety of a well-maintained national park. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to leave the horrors of Pine Creek behind. But the truth is, you never really escape something like that. The Wendigo may be far away now, but it still haunts me. Every rustle of leaves, every gust of wind that echoes through the trees sends a shiver down my spine. Some nights when I'm alone, I can still hear the voices of Daniel and Earl calling out to me from the dark. Sometimes I even swear that I see something moving between the trees, just out of sight. But I know better than to investigate or go looking for it. I do my best to not venture too deep into the wilderness. Once the Wendigo chooses you, it never really lets you go. This is an ad by BetterHelp. Workplace stress is now one of the top causes of declining mental health, with 61% of the global workforce experiencing higher than normal levels of stress. Myself, like many others, have been affected by this. To battle stress, most of us can't wave goodbye to work, but we can start small with a focus on wellness. For me, that's going for a walk in the woods and disconnecting from the constant buzz of the modern world. Along with that, therapy is a great option to help you navigate whatever challenges the workday or any day might bring. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it works, with an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5, based on over 1.7 million client reviews. And it's convenient too. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, switch therapists at any time. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/MrCreeps. That's betterhelp.com/MrCreeps. I've lived in East Tennessee for most of my life. And growing up, I would hear old wives' tales and urban legends about strange creatures that roam the forest. For the longest time, I thought what every other kid thought, that they were stories told to scare kids away from dangerous places so they wouldn't fall into a ravine or get lost in the massive wilderness. I never thought any of it was more than made-up stories. That's not to say that I didn't spend my share of time with covers pulled tightly over my head when the wind blew the branches against my window that happened to face the woods. As I grew older, I found myself gravitating towards these stories of strange creatures in the woods. That curiosity is what started me to investigate such things in my spare time. And people around here seem to be obsessed with Bigfoot, as if he's some local celebrity. They tend to ignore or downplay other cryptids. I don't know why. With the hundreds of thousands of acres of unexplored and barely explored forest, it seems there's a lot of space for anything that feels like making its home there could be left in relative peace. For me, I'm more of a fan of Dogman, unofficially of course. You see, once I graduated high school, my only goal was to become a park ranger. Where else could you go to work and be surrounded by such glorious nature, even at its most dangerous? There are literally dozens of stories that I could tell, but the one that sticks with me is the hikers from a couple of years ago. I remember it was early October. I always make the hike up to Klingerman's Dome several times during autumn. Gazing out over the canvas of trees spouting a myriad of colors, looking every bit like nature's fireworks show, reinforced that I made the right career choice. I was on patrol when a call came in to go to the cabins near Fontana Lake. I got the address and I headed south, crossing into North Carolina. When I got there, I was met by a woman who said her husband, son, and brother-in-law had gone to the lake fishing and hadn't come back. I got the information that I needed about their general description, names and description of the truck and boat, and then headed out to search for them. She said that they were heading up to Wolf Creek. I called it in and told the station that I would be driving down to Flat Branch to see if they went in the river there. It was a decent drive to get there, but then again it was a decent drive to get pretty much anywhere out in the backwoods of these Smoky Mountains. When I got there, I found 3 trucks parked off to the side. 2 of them had empty boat trailers. I checked the description the wife had given me and it matched one of the trucks. I had a beginning point for my search. I walked up to the water and I looked both ways, hoping to luck out and find them coming in from a hard day's fishing. No such luck. There was a house nearby, so I walked over and asked if they had seen my quarry. The man said that he had been out fishing himself yesterday and recalled seeing a boat like the one that I described, with 2 men and a boy in it. I asked him which direction they were going and he said west. I asked if he had a boat and could take me up to Wolf Creek. The man's demeanor changed from friendly to deadly quiet. He agreed to take me across the river, but not all the way to Wolf Creek. I accepted what I could get. After a quick jog back to my truck to get my backpack, he ferried me across and quickly left. It was a mile or so to the rural campsite I suspected that they had camped at. I started walking along the edge of the river, keeping an eye out for them. It wasn't long until I spotted a boat sitting on the shore. I approached the boat and it seemed to be the right one. Everything about this missing persons report seemed just like somebody who had stayed out later than they had planned. It was a little too easy. I would be very happy to find them sitting by a campfire about to pack up and go home. It didn't take long to hike to the campsite, but when I got there, things stopped being easy. There were only 2 tents set up, but they both looked like someone or something had torn into them. I checked inside each one and found sleeping bags and general camp equipment strewn about. I did my best not to disturb anything. When I came to the second tent, I found something more disturbing. This tent was also in disarray, but as I looked, I saw distinct drops of red. There was a notebook sitting near one of these sleeping bags. I picked it up and paged through it. October 3rd. We headed out for our annual fishing trip this morning. Mom wasn't too happy, but we told her that we would be back tomorrow. The drive to the boat launch was kind of long, but we filled the time talking about all the fish that we were going to catch, and eventually telling stories about the area. And Dad tried to scare me with a story about a cryptid that lives close by, but I knew that he was just yanking my chain. We got to the boat launch and headed out into the water without too much of a hitch. Uncle Roger nearly fell in trying to get the boat undone. He didn't find it nearly as funny as Dad and I did. Once we were out on the lake and had our lines in the water, he seemed to settle in and enjoy himself. After a few beers, he was laughing about it with us. We caught a couple of fish, but they were too small and we had to throw them back. Dad said that he had heard about a good spot up by Wolf Creek. We had better luck when we got there. Uncle Roger caught 3 largemouth bass and I caught 2. And Dad had a big one on his line, but it got loose before we could net it. It was starting to get dark, so Dad said that we should go to one of the rural campsites. We pulled the boat up to shore and tied it to a large tree, then took our gear and hiked to the campsite. There wasn't anybody else there, which Dad said was odd, because the site is normally full. We unpacked and set up our tents, and Dad got a fire going while Uncle Roger cleaned the fish. We ate and laughed and talked until it was dark and we turned in for the evening. Dad said there was a better fishing spot further west, and he wanted to go there early in the morning before we headed back to the cabin. It's the middle of the night and Dad is playing a joke on me. I woke up for some reason and he wasn't in the tent. I could hear rustling outside along with something pawing the ground and snorting. I knew that it was Dad trying to scare me. He and Uncle Roger had been telling cryptid stories while we ate supper. I told them that they weren't going to scare me like they did last year. They just looked at each other and smiled. I knew they would have something up their sleeves. I didn't bother to turn the light on or go out and check. I knew they would just run away and hide, pretending to be a creature that I had scared off. Then in the morning they would ask each other if they heard the commotion, hoping to scare me. I wasn't falling for it. One thing you learn from having a prankster for a dad is not to believe anything you see, or in this case, hear. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but Dad was making it tough. He was stomping and growling around so loud, trying to get my attention, but I wasn't having it. When I got up in the morning and went outside, the camp had been destroyed. Uncle Roger asked if I had heard anything last night, and I played along saying that I had heard some creature outside our tent, but I was too scared to go out and check. He made a good show of searching for Dad and seeming genuinely concerned. I was just waiting for Dad to get tired of the game and come back to the campsite. As the morning wore on, though, Uncle Roger started talking about going to look for him. I wanted to tell him that I hadn't fallen for their little prank, but I didn't want to spoil their fun. When noon rolled around and Dad wasn't back, I actually started to get worried. Maybe he had fallen and hit his head on a rock or something. Uncle Roger was beside himself. He told me that he would have already gone looking for Dad, but didn't want to leave me alone at the camp. We decided to go look for him. Uncle Roger found what looked like a scuffle as we headed off in that direction. He told me to stay right with him as we struggled through the forest looking for any sign of Dad. I was starting to doubt that this was a prank, I was getting worried about Dad. The further we went, the more I realized how wrong I had been. I wanted Dad to jump out and scare me just so that I would know he was okay. We walked around for hours searching for him, but we couldn't find him. I was beyond worried now, and I could tell Roger was too, but he didn't let it on. He just kept saying Dad was probably already back at the campsite now. When the sun had started sinking low in the sky, we gave up our search and headed back. Twice we lost our way and had to double back to get to the site. There weren't many trails out here, at least not that people had made. When we got back to the site, we ran to our tent, hoping that he would be there, but he wasn't. We ate a quick supper and turned in for the night. Uncle Roger promised me that he would wake me up when Dad came back. October 4th. Uncle Roger never woke me. Dad didn't come back. I said that we should call for help, but he told me that Dad had the only phone. We were trying to decide what to do when we heard a rustling in the woods and all the birds went silent. We looked around for the source of the noise and unfortunately, we found it. There was a thing coming towards us. It stood on its back hind legs and its body made these loud cracking sounds, like its bones were snapping into or out of place and echoing all around us. This thing was huge. I literally froze. My body refused to move as this horror came towards us. Uncle Roger grabbed me and yanked me over behind his tent. We tried to hide, but this thing saw us and let out a massive roar. We were so close that I could see blood on its claws and teeth. I prayed it wasn't Dad's. What do we do?" I said. He put his finger up to his lips. It looked over at us and then went into my tent like it was searching for something. "Come on," Uncle Roger said. We snuck away from the monster as quietly as possible. We slipped down the bank of the creek and walked downstream in the river. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "There's a bridge downstream. If we're quiet enough and that thing loses our scent, we could hide under it and hope that it goes away." I focused on walking as quietly as I could through the water. The sound of the creek was loud, so I was hopeful that it wouldn't see or hear us. It seemed like forever until we made it to the bridge. It was a small wooden bridge that spanned the creek, allowing hikers to pass over. There wasn't a lot of cover, so we tried to wedge ourselves into the shadows at the furthest end of it. Time slowed to a standstill as I sat there on the uncomfortable rocks, shivering. Neither of us had our jackets on, and the sun had gone down, taking the warm air with it. I started to doze when I felt a nudge. I looked up and Uncle Roger was motioning me to be quiet. I was about to ask why when I heard the creak of a board on the bridge right above my head. It wasn't a steady walk of a hiker going down the trail. It was a slow, deliberate step of somebody sneaking or hunting. I listened in mortal terror as the board slowly gave way to the weight of whatever was on it. One slow step at a time. As if I wasn't cold enough, my teeth began to chatter with fear. It couldn't have been very loud. Uncle Roger barely heard it and went into silent convulsions, motioning me to stop. I bit my tongue to keep the noise down and continued to listen. Only there was nothing to listen to. Whatever was on the bridge had stopped moving. It was as if it was listening to be sure that it had heard something. I strained my ears to listen for any movement. When I did, I heard sniffling. The thing was trying to catch our scent. For the first time, I noticed there was a slight breeze blowing. It was a blowing in the same direction the water flowed, but I had no idea which side of the bridge the creature was on. The wind could be our savior or our doom. Another slow footstep sounded like a bomb going off as the board creaked beneath it. For the briefest of moments, it seemed like it was moving away toward the far end of the bridge, I hoped and prayed that was the case as another footstep sounded and then another. I breathed a silent sigh of relief as I heard it step off the edge of the bridge and onto the trail. My relief was short-lived though, as I saw a face peek around the corner and peer under the bridge. I froze in terror as this thing that looked like a giant monstrous dog walking on its hind legs snuck around the corner of the bridge and dipped its feet into the water. It sniffed the air and poked its snout into the shadows under the far side of the bridge. Coming up empty, it turned its focus to the side of the bridge where we were hiding. Daylight had faded to dusk. There was precious little light to see by. That was our only saving grace. The shadows were darker here, making us nearly invisible. But that was rapidly ending as the beast approached. My mind was vapor-locked. I had no clue what to do. Running would just give us away more quickly. It was looking like our only choice was to die. At that moment, I was 100% sure of what had happened to Dad. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks at the thought of my father being torn apart by this monster. As I prepared to die, I felt Uncle Roger lean over a little closer. He was right in front of me and it was hard to see the monster. I saw his hand move down to the ground and pick up a stone the size of his fist. I knew right away what was happening. He was trying to shield me. He would offer himself as a sacrifice to protect me. My tears redoubled, making it hard to see. The monster was almost on us. It hadn't acted like it knew that we were there, but at this point it didn't matter. A few more steps and all doubt would be removed. I saw it reach out with its terrible claws that nearly touched Uncle Roger's nose. This was it. But suddenly it stopped. It lifted its head and sniffed the air. I saw the hair on its back bristle and then in a heartbeat it disappeared. Uncle Roger slowly stood and looked around. I tried to do the same, but my legs didn't want to cooperate. I dislodged some stones as I stood, making a little noise and causing Uncle Roger to hiss at me. We stood silently waiting for that thing to come jumping out at us from whatever hiding place it was in. But after a few minutes, I began to hope that we were okay. Uncle Roger led the way back to our camp. He said that we should change into dry clothes and get a little rest. It felt so good to be warm again. I snuggled up in my sleeping bag and wrote this message so that if we don't make it, somebody would know what happened. I hope my dad was as lucky as we were. I read through the entire message and then went back and reread the description of the creature. If it was what I thought it was amazing that they were still alive. Knowing what I was tracking put me on guard and made me wonder if I was being hunted right now. If it had intentionally left things lay so it could ensnare another victim. I didn't have much hope of finding them, but I would look anyway. I started with the tracks in the camp, specifically the ones around the tents. It seemed like the boy and his uncle had gone towards the creek. The creature's tracks went that way too. It followed them to the creek where its tracks seemed to wander around as if it had lost its prey. I saw where they went into the water to throw off its scent. Smart move. I followed the meandering tracks until they came to a small bridge that forded the creek. The tracks went over the bridge and then through the creek and underneath it. That didn't make sense unless they were hiding in the shadows. The creature's tracks made a sudden turn and went toward the trail, then up a hill, almost like something had spooked it. If it was what I thought, I couldn't imagine anything spooking it. I followed the creature's tracks up over the hill, and then they doubled back and followed the creek from the top of the ridge. I noticed there was a good view of the creek. It didn't make sense to be going this way until I found myself back in the camp. it had put them right back in its sights. I was confused for a while. I couldn't find a second set of tracks where they left the second time. If the creature had slaughtered them at the campsite, there would be a lot more blood, but there wasn't. In fact, I couldn't find any proof that they had come back. And then it hit me. I went back and looked at the tracks again. There were a few here and there that were doubled. The boy and his uncle must have come back here after the bridge, then left again the same way as before. The disturbing thing was I still hadn't seen any tracks of the father. I circled around the camp slowly, looking for anything that I might have missed. Eventually, I found a set of adult tracks, leaving a tent and going to the edge of the tree line. They stopped facing a tree. There was a dark spot on the bark a couple of feet up. This had the earmarks of a late-night bathroom break. But the confusing thing was the tracks never returned. Like he had stopped here to relieve himself and then just disappeared. I searched all around the tree when I made a startling discovery. There were flecks of blood farther up on the bark. I circled out further from the tree and found my terrible discovery. Tracks of the creature with drops of blood beside it. My marrow turned to ice at the implication. I followed my new trail hoping that I wouldn't find what my mind was telling me I would. I tried to report to the station on my radio, but strangely, all I got in response was static. I knew there were areas out here that didn't get good reception, but I didn't think that this was one of them, right near a posted campsite, just off of a trail. I decided I would try again later. I adjusted my backpack and started off after my prey. As a precaution, I pulled out my sidearm and made sure that it was loaded. It seemed like a silly thing to do, but when dealing with a dangerous alpha predator, it's best to make sure that you're ready to shoot. My hand shook a little when I put my gun back in its holster. I knew this was dangerous, and I knew that it would be just as easy to go back to the station and let search and rescue take care of it. But I also knew that there was a man who was in the clutches of a deadly creature, and that he was losing blood. I didn't have time to waste. I followed the tracks as best as I could through the brush and fallen trees. I would lose the trail sometimes only to pick it up again when I found a few more drops of blood. The tracks ran along the base of the hill heading west until it came to a stop. It was right in front of a mountain. I looked all around, but the trail had disappeared. Finally, in desperation, I looked up and noticed a cave partway up the mountain. I thought about going up there, but was unsure. That could be the home of this creature, or it could be the home of a dozen other animals, none of which would appreciate me storming into their living room unannounced. After another thorough look around the area, I decided it was likely where my prey had gone. Clouds had been rolling in all day and now decided that they were done playing nice. The rain began slowly enough but was soon coming down in sheets. The cave was looking better as I covered my eyes and tried to see where I was going. It was raining so hard that I couldn't see the cave anymore. I just kept pressing forward in what I hoped was a straight line, over fallen trees, through brush and rapidly rising streams. I finally looked up and saw that I was at the base of the mountain. My direction was off by a little bit and I had ended up a few dozen yards to the right of it, but it was no matter. I started climbing the mountain, being extra careful of my footing, especially in this torrential downpour. After a few slips, including one that had me nearly tumbling off the mountain, I made it to the mouth of the cave. I slipped inside and enjoyed a moment without water dumping on me. I looked down and the water dripping off of me made a little puddle like I had brought my own rain cloud into the cave with me. I shook off as much water as I could as quietly as possible. The rain pouring down outside made loud splashes inside the cave. It would have been difficult to hear anything else, but I still wanted to be sure. I unbuckled and sat the backpack down just inside the mouth of the cave. The rain had made it gain extra weight and I didn't know if I would have to move fast. I opened my pack and got out my water bottle and drank it. It had been a while since I had drank anything and I chugged half of it down. I closed it and saved the other half for if I got out of here alive. With that happy thought rattling around in my brain, I stowed the water bottle back in my pack and pulled out a small flashlight. I turned it on while pointing it at the floor. The bright beam illuminated the cave. It was large as caves go. I could stand up in it and not reach the ceiling. There were many boulders and stones and it wasn't a smooth floor. The walls were rough and there weren't any cave drawings in here. I walked slowly. Each step felt like I was closer to my doom. I pulled on my gun and held it tightly. The sense of foreboding thickened the air. Two thoughts impressed themselves on me. Firing a gun in here would probably deafen me, and the stench was horrific. It smelled like an open sewer in the middle of August. As I crept deeper into the cave, the sounds of the rain diminished, replaced by an eerie silence. I could hear the step of my feet, my breathing, and my heart pounding. As I was seriously considering turning around and leaving, when I saw something ahead of me move. It was big, at least as big as me. I dove against the wall for some cover, forgetting that I was holding a bright light in my hand, so it didn't matter if I tried to hide as long as the light was on. I pointed it at the floor but didn't turn it off. I heard a shuffling sound getting closer. I was tempted to turn off the light, but giving the edge to this creature was not a good idea. It already had the home field advantage. I heard it sniffing, but I couldn't see it yet. I decided to find out more by bringing my light up and shining it deeper into the cave. I got the shock of my life when my light landed on the creature and it was only a few steps away. It was big, at least 6 feet tall, and looked like a dog. With a long snout, only its body seemed elongated. It stood on its hind legs and had hands attached to muscular arms. Overall, it looked like a nightmare. It recoiled from the light and let out a growl. It was all that I could do to keep from soiling myself. Without thinking, I pointed my gun and fired. The sound was deafening. My ears instantly started ringing. The creature roared at me and then turned and ran deeper into the cave. It had roared a mere few feet from me, yet I barely heard it. I stumbled and had to take a minute to steady myself, and then I started following it deeper into the cave. To this day, I really don't know why, other than needing to know if the hiker was alive. I looked at the ground to see if there was any blood, but there wasn't. I must have just startled it with the shot, and that wasn't great news. I had hoped that I would have hit it and it was wounded. Just scared meant that it would be ready to fight when I saw it again. After all, I'm sure to the creature that I was the invader and it was defending its home. I continued farther into the cave, shining my light and watching for any sudden movement. I had no idea where it was or if it was setting a trap for me. I felt a whiff of air and jumped back a split second before the claws sliced the air where my face would have been. I rolled and came up shooting, holding my light beside the gun to illuminate my target. I fired over and over, pointing and shooting without having the time to aim. I watched as it ducked every shot and ran within human speed. Just before it disappeared from sight, I saw it skip a step as I fired my last shot. My hopes soared that I had hit it at least once. I ejected the magazine and put a fresh one in, reminding myself that I only had one more and chastising myself for not being more careful with my limited ammo. I justified it by telling myself that there's no use dying with a full magazine. I followed once again, nearly jumping for joy when I came to the spot where it had disappeared and saw a spot of fresh blood on the ground. I was hoping for more, but as I went, the drops were every few feet. Even though it didn't seem like much at the speed that it was running, I was sure that it had sprung a major leak. I followed the trail deeper into the cave. There was a chill in the air that made me shudder. My mind told me that it felt like a tomb. My tomb. I shook off those thoughts and continued until the blood had stopped. I shone my light on the small puddle in the ground beyond where there was no blood. My mind screamed at me that it was a trap. I shone my light all around, even on the ceiling, but I couldn't see it. I started backing out the same way that I had come in, my eyes darting all around in search of my prey. It hit me like a bulldozer going 60 miles an hour. It had come out of nowhere and rammed me in the back. I sprawled out on the floor, rolling to a stop. My flashlight lay a few feet away and I had no idea where the gun was. The wind was knocked out of me. I tried to breathe but couldn't. I just lay there gasping for air. It slowly circled around me, growling and bristling. I knew that it was going for the kill. I screamed at my brain to move, but my body refused to cooperate. I tried to focus on my breathing and regain mobility as it circled closer. I could see its breath chugging out of its mouth like a steam engine. I knew that it was time. My arm was the first to recover. I slowly moved it toward the flashlight. It stopped circling just as I got a grip on the light. I saw the creature hunching to lunge at me. I clicked the light to strobe and aimed it at the creature's face. It screamed and clawed at the air as if it could fight off the light. I saw the creature hunching to lunge at me. I clicked the light to strobe and aimed it at the creature's face. It screamed and clawed at the air as if it could fight off the light. I rose to my knees, keeping the light on it. When it turned away, I shone it around desperately searching for my gun. I found it a few yards away and tried to run for it, but my body hadn't fully recovered and I fell flat on my face. My life in the balance, I didn't bother with the pain of my freshly broken nose. I crawled toward the gun with every ounce of energy in me. It seemed like an eternity until I put my hand on the grip and brought it to bear on the creature. It had recovered and was running at me full speed. I shone the strobe at it again and it veered away from the light. I stood and aimed at it, squeezing the trigger. I saw the satisfying impact of the bullet in its side and squeezed the trigger again, making another hole on the far side of its chest. I squeezed over and over, hitting it each time and watching it reel from the impact. But it stayed on its feet. It growled and charged as my slide locked back, showing an empty chamber. I shone the strobe in its eyes once more, but this time it just ran off to the other side of the room. I used the distraction to eject my magazine and load in the last full one. I released the slide and started firing immediately, hitting it in the hind quarter and leg, but not stopping it. I stopped shooting and forced myself to concentrate. I aimed carefully as it ran toward me, and at the right moment I squeezed the trigger. It went down hard, squealing like a stuck pig. It thrashed and clawed at its face, tumbling over itself. Blood flew everywhere from its many gunshot wounds, but it still continued flailing about and squealing in pain. After a few minutes of this, it finally settled down and it was still enough for me to see my handiwork. I had shot it in the eye. There was nothing left there but a bloody hole. I didn't dare approach it. I stood at a respectful distance and watched, my gun ready if it tried to make a move. Its squeals became moans, finally turning into a heavy sigh, and then it was still. I shone the light on it, feeling cautiously optimistic that this thing was no longer a threat. And then I remembered what I was doing here in the first place. I tried to get my bearings and proceeded further into the cave. My main thought was not only finding the hiker alive, but also hoping and praying that there wasn't another one of those creatures here. I didn't have another fight like that left in me. The path curved downwards until it came to a large open area. I shone the light around, looking for anything. Off in the far corner, there was a flash of red as I panned through. I approached it cautiously and found that it was a jacket. Inside the jacket was a piece of meat that used to be a human being. His throat had been ripped out and his legs were missing. All that was left of them were some bones. The thing must have been working its way up, saving the arms and torso for later. The man's face was a frozen scream. I can't even imagine the horror of being dragged away from your loved ones, only to be murdered and eaten in some cold and dark cave. I wasn't even sure if he was dead when the thing ripped his legs off. I had to stop focusing on such things and decide what to do. If I left the remains here, there was no doubt some other animal would come by and finish off what the creature had started. I needed to try to get him to his family for closure and a proper burial. I bent down, trying to figure out how to carry him. A fireman's carry was out. There were no legs for counterbalance. In the end, I picked him up by his arms and flung them over my shoulder, holding onto them and turning his body into some macabre payback. I started back out of the cave, hoping that I would be able to carry him all the way back to the campsite and finally back to my truck. As I trudged back through the cave, I came to the section where our fight had taken place. Shell casings and blood were strewn about the ground. I wondered to myself how I had avoided getting hit by a stray ricochet when I looked over to where the creature lay. Only it wasn't there. I shone my light all around, frantically whipping about, but it was gone. I found the spot where it had laid still and I thought that it had died. There was a large pool of blood there, but no body. I pulled my gun out of my holster and ejected the magazine, and checked to see how many rounds that I had left. There were only 2. I hoped whoever that thing was that it was no longer in the mood for hunting or revenge. In the end, I decided there was nothing that I could do. If the thing attacked me, I was defenseless, carrying literal deadweight on my back. I holstered the gun and hitched up my human backpack, then shone the light toward the mouth of the cave and kept walking. My hearing was just starting to return to normal, although I was sure that I would have some permanent hearing loss. I could hear the shuffling of my feet as I staggered toward the cave opening. When I got there, I found a world transformed. Daylight was just starting to peek its way around the dark. However, the rain had created a massive fog bank. I couldn't see anything down in the valley that I had come from. It was a sea of fog. Only the peaks of the mountains escaped its suffocating blanket. I looked over and saw my backpack patiently waiting for my return. I laid my burden down and got the water bottle out, glad that I had saved the last drink for now. As I sat on the edge of the cave precipice, I looked down and wondered how I was going to get the body down there without falling to my own death. For an instant, it was tempting to throw it down and find it at the bottom once I had climbed down. But I thought that this fellow had been through enough and didn't need the indignity of becoming a human frisbee. I dug through my backpack and found some bungee cords. I bungeed him to my back and carefully started my descent, leaving my faithful backpack to watch me desert it. I wish that I could take it with me, but there was no way that I could carry both. As I climbed down, there were a few times that I lost my footing and nearly took the short and deadly route down. Fortunately, though, I made it to the bottom in one piece. Instead of celebrating, though, I discovered a new problem. The fog was so thick that I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I had no idea how I was going to find my way out of there. I decided to go straight away from the mountain and hope that the fog cleared as I went. The rain had turned the forest into a marshland. The ground was soft and these streams had overgrown their banks. I found myself wading through knee-deep water on more than one occasion. As I trudged along, hoping that I had enough energy to get back without collapsing from exhaustion. Two thoughts chased each other around my mind. Where were the other hikers and where was the creature? I hadn't seen any other remains in the cave. If it had killed them, it hadn't had time to take them back to the cave yet. Perhaps my pursuit had forced it to retreat to its cave before it could properly retrieve its own bounty. I had kept my ears open for any sounds of it following me. The most disconcerting thing was the lack of forest noises. The animals and birds were strangely silent. Usually that meant there was a predator nearby. In this ungodly fog, perhaps they were just sleeping and waiting for it to clear. Yeah, that sounded good. It gave me the false illusion that I wasn't in mortal danger from a wounded alpha predator bent on revenge. But I couldn't focus on that, or worry would drain my resolve to get us both out of there. I took a break from trudging and tried to get my bearings. I checked my watch and I had been walking for over an hour. It was late morning and the sun should have been high in the sky, but the oppressive fog continued to smother it. I looked around, but there was nothing to see except the dingy gray curtain of hopelessness. I was about to collapse and give up when I heard it. The faint sound of hope. I could hear the creek running. As hope rose, it was suddenly dashed. I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I whipped around so fast that my macabre backpack nearly made me lose my balance. I couldn't see anything through the fog, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. With a renewed sense of determination, along with a strong desire to elude whatever was pursuing me, I set out toward the sound of the creek. It was still slow going, but I found fearing for my life was a great motivator. I had no doubt whatsoever that the footsteps behind me were those of the creature bent on revenge. After what seemed like an eternity, I gazed at the most awesome sight that I had seen all day. Wolf Creek in all its 6-foot-wide, overflowing banks of glory. I followed it until I came across the Lakeshore Trail and the journey became much easier. The fog was even beginning to lift, which was a blessing but also a curse. I could finally see far enough behind me to confirm that the creature was indeed following me. I had wondered the entire time why it hadn't overtaken me, but now that I caught sight of it, I understood. It was grotesque. It looked like it came straight from hell. Its one eye socket was leaking and the many bullet wounds covered it in blood. There were places where I could see internal organs trying to escape the body, and its right leg had a bullet wound. It limped severely. As I watched it, I wondered how it had made it this far, but then I looked into its remaining eye and saw intense and rage burning. I knew that I would die a horribly grotesque death if I slowed enough for it to catch up to me. We continued this slow pursuit of death until I reached the banks where Wolf Creek opened up into the lake. My energy was nearly gone. At one point, I considered dropping my human backpack in hopes that it would feed on it instead of me, but then I would have failed. I came here to find this hiker and bring him back. That thought lit a fire deep within me. I came to the edge of the lake, with the creature a mere few yards behind me. I glanced around, hoping to see a boat that I could flag down, but no such luck. With no other choice, I waded into the water. It was cold, but instead of refreshing me, it chilled me and sapped my little remaining strength. The creature entered the water behind me and seemed to be gaining. It got deeper to the point where I was no longer able to walk and had to start swimming. The far side of the lake looked like it was miles away, even though I knew it was much less than that. I swam for all I was worth, knowing at any moment that I would be pulled under by the creature. My passenger strapped to my back wasn't helping either. The literal definition of dead weight every minute that I had to fight off the urge to dump him. When I reached the other side, I was exhausted. I lay there on the shore waiting for the creature to disembowel me, but unable to move to defend myself in any way. With great effort, I turned to look back and see when my doom would come. To my great surprise, I saw it staring back at me from the far beach. I guess it couldn't swim. I chuckled to myself as I lay there gathering strength for the continued journey back to the truck. Eventually, I got there. As I opened the door for a fleeting moment, I considered putting the hiker in the passenger seat. But then I looked at the wet, soaked torso and considered gently laying him in the truck bed. The drive back was long and I continually had to shake myself to stay awake, but eventually I made it to the cabin. I stumbled up to the door and I knocked once. "Oh my God," the woman said when she saw me. "Are you all right?" I hung my head. "No, but I will be after around 3 days of sleep. Unfortunately, I have bad news for you. I found your husband, but not your son or brother-in-law." A man and a boy came out of the cabin and stared at me. I instantly knew who they were and grabbed them both in a huge hug. "I'm so glad you made it out," I said, fighting back tears. Thanks," the man said, pulling out of my hug. "Who are you again?" "He's the ranger that came to look for all 3 of you," she said. "I don't understand, your tracks were confusing," I said. "I followed them down to the bridge, but then they went back up to the campsite." "We got some rest," the boy said. "Then Uncle Roger came and said that we were going. We left everything and slipped away to the boat, rowed across the river and left." I smiled. "I'm very glad you did." He looked at me with expectant eyes. "You said you found my dad." My face fell. "I did, but it was too late." "So I nodded somberly. "Where is he?" "He's in my truck, but you don't want to see that." Before I could say another word, he ran to the truck and looked in the passenger seat. A look of confusion fell over his eyes as he saw that nobody was there. And then he slowly looked toward the bed of the truck. He stepped back and looked over the side into the bed. He instantly dissolved into tears and slid down to the side of the truck, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," I said to the woman and man. She grabbed me and gave me a hug. "Don't be," she said. "Without you, we wouldn't have known for weeks, months, maybe even years what had happened. We would go on looking with false hope. You've given us a chance for closure and to properly grieve." She released me and I wiped my eyes. I looked at the man and walked down to the truck. He followed and we gently removed the body and laid him on the couch and then covered him with a blanket. The boy followed us back to the cabin but wouldn't look at me or anyone else. He sat in a chair and stared at the blanket covering his father's body. I knew that I had done all that I could, so I excused myself and started toward the door. I paused and said to the boy, "I promise I'll make sure that thing never hurts anyone again." He looked up at me, eyes full of tears, and said, "How will that help my dad?" His mother opened her mouth, but I held a hand up to silence her. I knew the boy was just hurting. I left without another word. On the drive back, I called the station and told them everything that had happened, and then told them that I was going home and calling off for the following day. After getting home and stumbling into a shower and collapsing in bed, there was only one thought on my mind. I would return to Wolf Creek very soon with more and bigger guns. I would end that monster if it was the last thing I did. But that's another story. My name is Peter Tully, and my story is not a happy one. I protect a land that is brimming with horrors beyond your dizziest nightmares. The truth of this region is a secret safeguarded by a few burdened souls. It is our duty to shield the world from the twisted terrors within this place. I have seen things that eyes cannot discern, and I have learned things that minds cannot fathom. After 20 years of this unending nightmare, I'm ready to share my story. It is by no means a short tale, and this is only the very beginning. When I moved to Scotland in the spring of 2004, I was a young man. I left the Metropolitan Police Force behind and I accepted a position as a park ranger in the Scottish Highlands. Maria and I were hoping to start a family. It was a clean slate. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Maria had asked. "Of course," I said. "Are you?" "Well, it's a bit late for both of us to be asking these questions now." Maria laughed, motioning at the window. "We're already in Scotland." I smiled. "I know, but you can always say the word and we could hop in that car and drive back to London." "I don't care about London," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. "I care about you." I kissed her forehead. "This won't be like the city, Maria. It's peaceful out here." "Every job comes with challenges, Peter," she said. "Are you ready to jump straight into work? You can take more time to recover." "I love you," I said, tightly squeezing my wife. "But I'm ready for this." We were so naive. The Highlands is a region of Scotland known around the world, and yet it is not truly known by anyone. At least not this particular piece of haunted woodland, a location that I will not disclose. The Highlands is a vast, sprawling region, and I pray that nobody finds my park. You would be wise to never try. When I arrived at the village's local pub on my induction day, I was met with steely glares from the establishment's handful of early morning drinkers. It was the sort of standoffish demeanor that newcomers often receive from locals, especially an Englishman in a Scottish village. Ancient prejudices never really die now, do they? "Over here, Peter," a man hoarsely bellowed. I turned to see Matthew Wright, the old man I recognized from my job interview. It had only been a month since our online call, and yet the fellow had somehow aged about 10 years or so. He must have been in his late 60s at the time, and I could only assume it to be the stress-induced aging. The result most likely of Matthew fulfilling park duties, given the previous ranger's disappearance 3 months prior. That was the real reason for Maria's concern regarding the job. The murky circumstances surrounding the opening of the position in the first place. "Hello, Matthew," I said, sitting opposite the weathered man. "How are you?" I'm well," he replied in a soft, gruff voice. "Are you and the wife settled?" I nodded. "Yes, this village is idyllic," Matthew coarsely interrupted. "Quaint, tranquil, beautiful." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, unsure as to how I should respond to the sudden curt remark. "There is truth to that," the old man said. "But this haven is the tip of safety atop the iceberg. Beneath the surface, things look quite different." "I'm not sure that I understand," I awkwardly replied. "I wouldn't expect you to understand," Matthew said, pausing for a moment. "You impressed me with your interview, Peter. There is a reason that I asked so many questions about your time on the force. I wasn't looking for an ordinary person. I was looking for somebody who had already stared horror in the eyes." I stifled the gulp that involuntarily rose to the top of my throat. "Are you okay?" Matthew asked, possibly noticing that the color had drained from my face. I nodded, composing myself. "Yes, I'm fine, I'm thinking about the woman who held the position before me." "Shirley Pond," Matthew said. "I understand your hesitation, Peter. Who would want to fill the position of a missing person? Well, I won't lie to you. These woods are dangerous, and the job comes with risks." "I know," I said. "You warned me." I hadn't divulged that piece of information to Maria, as I knew that she was already uneasy about me returning to work after the nervous breakdown in London. "I did," Matthew said, sighing. "But, well, what do you imagine might have happened to Shirley? What's the worst thing you've imagined?" I frowned at the horrid nature of the question. I imagined that she had either tumbled over a mountainous cliff edge or met her demise at the hands of an animal. Still, there are very few wild animals in the Highlands. A boar could have attacked the park ranger, but it was highly unlikely. "Here's the thing, Peter," Matthew said, seeing that I had no answer. "Your darkest fantasy doesn't compare to the true nature of the forest. And though I want so desperately to tell you what you'll find in the woods, I will not bother." "Why?" I asked, frowning. Matthew sighed. "You wouldn't believe me, boy. You simply would not believe me." "Try," I said. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "You would laugh in my face and leave." He said a lot without saying much. As I started to piece things together in my brain, the man no doubt believed in cryptids, monsters, the boogeyman, perhaps old Nessie herself hiding in the loch. Being an English city boy with a rational approach to life, I didn't believe in such things. "What's out there? Some sort of creature?" I asked. Matthew eyed me for a few seconds, perhaps, searching for the faintest hint of a smile on my face, any sign of mockery, and I was certain that I would be fired before I even started. "There are those who know what lie in those woods," Matthew said, nodding his head at a couple of the drinkers in the pub. "They've seen things. Seeing is the only way to make a person truly believe." "Well, why didn't you hire a local then?" I asked. "Look at us, Peter, we're old, too old. And I couldn't bring myself to ask our children, but a stranger, well, that seemed." Matthew suddenly paused, contemplatively scratching his face. "You know, I think I've rushed into this, perhaps you." "You said it yourself," I interrupted, feeling the job opportunity slipping from my grip. "Nobody else is in a fit state for the position. It has to be me." Matthew suddenly slammed his fist onto the table and the entire pub fell silent. Nobody moved a muscle, nobody made a sound. I waited for the man to find his calm, collected disposition again. "Peter, you don't even know what's in those woods." "No," I agreed, "but I know that I just have to do this, Matthew. And as you said, I won't believe it until I see it for myself." "And even then you won't believe," Matthew whispered. I smiled victoriously. "So, does that mean that I have the job?" "Only if you accept one thing," he said. "Go on," I replied. Matthew sighed. "Once you take this path, you cannot leave it." I nodded in acceptance. I'm not sure whether the man viewed me as courageous or moronic, a mixture of the two, I imagine. Whatever the case, Matthew stopped resisting. He begrudgingly drove me from the village to the watchtower, a wooden structure that loomed over the mountainous region which would become my domain. "The Highlands of the Dead," Matthew said as we clambered out of the car. "Well, that's an ominous name," I responded. Matthew sighed. "Dreadful things have happened here. We've had our fair share of tragedies over the decades." "The school teacher," I said, vaguely remembering a certain news story. "Yes, what he did was unthinkable." I nodded, strolling towards the staircase at the foot of the watchtower. "You've stopped prying me for information about the woods," the man noted. I shrugged. "I know you won't tell me, so what's the use?" I just know that you would run," he said. "Not from fear. Most likely you would view this job as a farce. You would think me to be some sort of crackpot." I already think that," I thought, stifling a laugh. Matthew gave a rundown of the duties that I would be expected to perform. He was searching for things to say, drawing out the initiation period, possibly hoping that it would change my mind. Eventually, the man sighed heavily. "All right, well, I suppose I'd better go," Matthew said. I nodded. "It's going to be fine." "Okay," he replied uncertainly. There were no parting words of wisdom from the old man, a man who perhaps was not really that old, more hardened by the things that he had experienced, as I would soon learn. During the first few hours of my shift, I admired gorgeous vistas from my sheltered room atop the watchtower. Stunning jagged terrain stretched to the horizon. Lakes glistened in the late afternoon sun. Luscious green pastures and rocky hillsides lay beyond my serene pine tree forest. It was a place of outstanding beauty. Highlands of the Dead felt like a cruel name to me. It was around 8 in the evening that the sun began to set, and in the soft orange glow of the day's diminishing light, I saw something peculiar. About a mile in the distance, the forest appeared to be moving. After hurriedly lifting my binoculars to my eyes, I saw that the trees had been felled, and a building had inexplicably appeared in the clearing. "What the?" I started, immediately grabbing my things and sprinting out the door. By the time that I had reached the bottom of the watchtower staircase, the light of the day was almost entirely gone. I turned on my torch and began to navigate through the towering trees, which had seemed so minute and manageable from the height of the watchtower. On the ground, however, I felt small and fragile. This only worsened as night came and a heavy blanket of darkness engulfed me. "Oh, come on," I told myself, "stop it. You're becoming a local already, believing in ghosts and demons." I blamed the tragedy of the school teacher for the superstitious nature of the townsfolk. Trauma can do awful things to a person's psyche, and the man in question had done things beyond awful to the village. I had read about it in the paper several years prior. Arnold Haversham took 3 children into the woods, committed unspeakable acts, and then hanged himself from a tree. Nothing supernatural there. Untoward, but unfortunately very human in nature. That was what I repeated to myself as I walked further into the woods, farther from the warmth and comfort of the watchtower. But when I had reached the clearing, I could no longer rationalize anything. A building had emerged from the underworld. It had torn through grass and dirt, splintering the surrounding trees. No felling or man-made construction. This building, sprouting from nothingness, had created itself, and when I realized that I recognized the structure, I stumbled backwards in horror. It was the village school. A moss-covered, ghoulish representation of the building was lurking in the depths of the Scottish Highlands at the dead of night. "How?" I whispered, shaking. Matthew had been right. The horrors of the woods had to be seen to be believed. But I hadn't even seen the true horrors yet. A scream pierced the night and I tumbled to the ground, managing to hold onto my torch. The haunting, pained sound came from the belly of the demonic building, a building that had clearly just risen from Hades itself. And yet, defying all sensibility, I found myself clambering to my feet and walking towards the ajar front doors. Redemption. It had been served up on a platter. A chance to right my wrongs, a chance to forget London. I tore the splintered doors open, almost pulling one of them from its hinges, and then stepping over the bumpy ground that had risen through the cracks of the tiled floor, I shone my torch into the great abyss before me. I was lighting an overgrown, long-forgotten corridor. The apocalyptic hallway was lined with rusty lockers coated in vines. The tiles crumbled beneath my feet, giving way to dirt and rock. And as I disappeared deeper into the paranormal building, I began to regret my decision. But just like Matthew and the other villagers, trauma was guiding me blindly forwards. "Help!" A distorted voice screeched from the distance. I followed the sound down a corridor to the right, finding that my torch seemed to be struggling to permeate the thick shadows of the halls. The school's atmosphere was slanted, disjointed. There was blackness beyond comprehension within those walls, and there was a silence which gave way to the sound of my heartbeat. "Please," a girl cried. It came from a room at the end of the corridor, classroom 11A. Steadying my torch in my trembling hand, I took tentative steps towards the doorway, finally hearing something, a scratching sound in an otherwise silent building. Free hand pressed against the door, I gently pushed it open. It revealed a tiny box room with 3 chairs and a whiteboard on the far wall, but there was nobody inside. There was only the ever-loudening sound of scratching from above. "Hello?" I called. The scratching stopped, and all that remained yet again was the sound of my heartbeat, an ever-quickening rhythm. Without warning, the ceiling tiles gave way. I yelled in terror as 3 bodies came tumbling down. I fell through the open doorway and I looked up at the terrifying scene from the ground. 3 school children, 2 boys and a girl, swayed from nooses which led into the blackened void beyond the vanished ceiling. But these were no corpses. The children had hollow eye sockets burrowing deeply into their faces. Their gaping mouths revealed black chasms to match their eyes, and their skin was shallow. It scarcely clung to their skeletons, much as their tattered uniforms barely clung to their bodies. But most horribly, their necks were elongated to a couple of feet in length. With every swing, their terribly long bodies lightly brushed the tiles of the floor. "Help!" My eyes shot to the dead girl whose empty, lifeless mouth twitched to utter that ghastly plea. Body froze and I hoisted myself up and turned on my heel. I could hear moans of agony from behind me as I sprinted along lightless corridors, struggling to navigate my way out of the school. Everything looked different. I was caught in an ever-changing maze. And when I finally found the school's main entryway, the ground began to quake. The ceiling above slowly descended, and as dirt filled the school entrance, I realized that the spectral building was sinking. I sprinted towards the exit, desperately trying to maintain my footing on the rocky surface beneath my feet. I could feel the fresh air spilling through the doorway. My brain was waking from a trance. Why did I even come in here? I wondered. The haunted place had clearly wormed its way into my brain, but I was almost free of it. And then as I crawled through the half-sunken doorway, something clutched my ankle. "You belong," a sinister voice shrieked. I turned to face a hand rising from a crevice in the dirt. A near fleshless, ghoulish limb slithered upwards, and when its face emerged, the blood drained from my own. Like those of the children, it was rotten, bearing shallow eye sockets and a blackened mouth. A mouth that opened wide, unleashing a deep and unyielding cry. And as I looked upon the unliving thing, my mind filled with blanks. I remembered the picture from the news article. Arnold Haversham. The building was plummeting into the ground below, and the abomination from this dimension was trying to take me into its hollow. I dug my fingernails into the dirt, desperately scrambling to stay in the world above. And then I saw something. Illuminating the blackened hole, I could faintly distinguish another pair of rotting hands, slender but just as hauntingly unearthly. The brittle fingers coiled around the schoolteacher's inhuman face, and the man growled ferociously as an unseen creature separated from him. As my ankle finally slipped out of Haversham's grasp, I jumped to my feet, watching the ground seal above the haunted school and its inhabitants. The forest suddenly seemed so peaceful, but it had lost all of its beauty. It only had taken one night for me to understand the disgruntled man. Not stopping to catch my breath, I ran back to the watchtower, and then I sat in my office, shivering until Matthew arrived at around 5 in the morning. He saw my pale face and smiled pitifully. "I tried to warn you." How is it real?" I whispered. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "The schoolteacher." Matthew Wright raised an inquisitive eyebrow and widened his eyes. "Haversham?" "Yes. Isn't that what you saw?" He shook his head. "Peter, there are many things in this forest, and none of them—" "I quit," I interrupted, "but you knew that already." "Wait," Matthew said sternly. What did I tell you? I don't care, I said, heading to the door. The old man tightly grabbed my arm as I passed him in the doorway. You will, he said. Once you take this path, you cannot leave it. Well, just watch me, I replied. If you try to leave the Highlands, Matthew continued, refusing to release my arm. You join the undead. What are you talking about? You belong to the woods now. We all do. I stared into the old man's eyes and saw for a second the same hollow cavities that had eyed me from Arnold Haversham's face. And then I remembered the haunting entity's words. You belong. You're lying, I said. Then why haven't we left? Matthew asked. Knowing what we know, do you think we would choose to stay here? You're crazy, I replied, wrenching my arm free. That's why. Matthew followed me down the staircase as I hurried away from him. Think of Maria, he said. What does this have to do with her? I barked, stopping and turning to face the man. Everyone in this village is entwined with the Highlands, he explained, placing a hand on my shoulder. I tried to warn you, Peter. No, you didn't, I said, snarling as I squared up to the old man. You lured me to this cursed village and you tricked me into agreeing to do this job. Your warnings were meaningless. You know that I would view you as nothing more than a crazy old man telling stories. You knew exactly what you were doing. Aye, Matthew replied. Maybe, but I had to do it for the village. We need a ranger and I'm falling apart at the seams. Do it for the village, I cried, laughing maniacally. What use am I against horrors of that magnitude? Matthew gripped both of my shoulders tightly and spoke coldly. The woods need souls. That is our purpose. We sacrifice our souls to it every night. We give it a piece of ourselves, and in return it spares the village, and it spares everyone. I paused. The man's weary and worn face finally made sense. Everyone except us, I whispered. Matthew nodded. Everyone except us. So I kill myself slowly like you, I asked. That's my lot in life. You save the village. That's your lot in life, he said. I wish that I could offer a happy ending, but 20 years later, at the age of 42, I found myself becoming the now deceased Matthew Wright. I have assumed his role as a withered and worn-out man, a man who on a nightly basis sacrifices himself to the Highlands of the dead. And why? Well, to protect Maria, and to protect our son Henry, and to protect everyone. I strive to free myself of this prison, though there are things that I have learned over the past 2 decades. The full truth of these woods is still a mystery to me. Still, there is more to my story. This is only the beginning. In 2006, after 2 years on the job, Henry was born. I can't believe we have a Scottish baby, my wife joked. I'm not sure that's how it works, Maria, I replied, smiling. We're still English. You're living in denial, she said. The wee lad will be down at the pub with you and Matthew before long, downing pints and talking about that one time he saw an adder snake in the forest. I don't know. I've had no idea what you two discuss. I grunted, changing the subject, but my wife wouldn't let it lie. Why do you hate talking about life as a park ranger? She asked. It's just, Matthew, he's my boss and it's hard to see him as a friend, I said. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. How would I have approached the topic? Matthew lured us here under false pretenses. The forest is cursed, we're cursed, and now our baby is too. She wouldn't have believed me anyway. Oh great, I'm sounding just like the old man now, I thought. I tried to focus on the tiny beacon of light that we had brought home with us. Life had given us something pure. I had a wife and a son. Not everything about my existence was terrible. Still, you wouldn't be here if I had a pleasant story for you. It was late November in 2006. Henry was 10 months old, and I was consumed by the duties of parenthood that I hardly had the mental fortitude to endure the forest's nightly torture. I spent most nights sleeping in the sheltered room at the top of the watchtower. My heart felt lighter in truth. The woods can't hurt me anymore, I told myself. But the pathways in my sleep-deprived brain clearly weren't connecting. I should have realized that I wasn't allowing the forest to feed on my soul, and that meant it was hungry. "Peter!" Maria screamed. Her shattering cry of agony woke me from my pre-work nap. Drenched in sweat, I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the alarm clock. 9:30 p.m., an hour before my shift began. "Maria?" I sleepily groaned. "Henry's gone," she shrieked in a voice barely human. Every tendon in my body tensed. I leapt up, donned my ranger gear, and rushed into the baby's room. The window had been shattered, and Henry's empty cot rocked eerily in the wind. I heard the smash and told Peter. He was already gone when I came upstairs." Maria sobbed before screaming again. "Who would take him? Who would do this?" "I don't know, Maria," I said, embracing my wife. "But we'll bring him home. I will find him." I ran out of the house, beelining for my car. I noticed black clouds blending with the night sky. A storm approached. My neighbor Tommy was standing in his front garden. With elbows pointing outwards, he clasped his hips with his hands. He was sucking his teeth and disapprovingly shaking his head. "Careful on your shift tonight, Peter," he warned me. "Weather's taken a..." "Tommy, I need you and Maggie to watch Maria for me," I said, unlocking my car. The man frowned. "What the devil is the matter with you, lad?" I pointed at the non-existent second-floor window, and when Tommy looked up at it, his eyes widened. "What's happened there?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, opening the car door. "But I don't care about that, Tommy. Henry's gone." I didn't stop to say anything else. Something in my gut told me that I had to drive. Henry was in the forest and I could feel it. I sped through the deserted streets of our village, heading onto the curved road which led into the Highlands of the dead. And as I drove, I became aware of a growing rumbling from the sky above, a guttural groan. And then a blinding bolt of lightning illuminated the forest ahead. It was followed by a menacing thunderclap and a torrential downpour of rain. When I eventually reached the watchtower, the storm had reached a feverish crescendo of light and sound. The wooden structure was swaying uncertainly under the strain of the wind's endless onslaught. And as another lightning bolt struck the forest, it illuminated the sheltered room at the top of the watchtower. That was then I noticed something truly dreadful. The silhouette of a tall creature with spindly arms and legs. It almost had the shape of a woman, and in its arms it cradled a bundle. Henry. The lightning disappeared and the room plunged back into darkness. I flew out of my car and trudged through the thick slushy muck leading up to the watchtower staircase. Lighting the way with my torch, I took the steps two at a time, repeatedly losing my footing on the drenched metalwork. A sudden smashing noise startled me and I braced myself against the handrail. I'm surprised that I heard it over the roar of rain and thunder, but paternal instincts are unimaginably powerful, and the hair on my skin was standing upright. I leaned over the side of the railing looking up to the top of the watchtower, and then I screamed in horror as I saw two shriveled, discolored arms shakily stretching over the edge of the top floor's railing. Fingers of an abnormal length were curled around a familiar star-covered blanket. There was absolutely no doubt in my mind. Henry was inside. "No!" I screamed. I was still 20 feet from the top of the tower. I wasn't going to make it in time. The fingers released and the bundle plummeted. I felt the world slow around me. As I curled my back over the edge of the railing, I watched the blanket unravel above me, and little Henry with limbs flailing tumbled out of it. His terrified eyes were swimming with tears and he screeched manically as he fell towards me. His body clunkily connecting with my chest and I frantically scrambled to scoop him up. Against all odds, I caught him. I lost my footing for a second, but I managed to brace my body against the railing, and then I pulled the two of us to safety. Heart racing, I fled down the staircase, and I was perplexed to find another park ranger vehicle parked alongside mine. It was Matthew. "What are you doing here?" I screamed over the rain. "Maria called me. Is Henry okay?" "Leave us alone," I growled, barging past the man. "You've been sleeping up there on your shifts," Matthew continued, "not venturing out into the forest and not feeding it." "Have you been watching me?" "I have a village to protect, Peter," the man said. "Well, then you take over," I yelled. "I have a baby, I don't sleep, and you didn't say I couldn't spend my shift in the watchtower." "You haven't been given the forest what it needs, Peter, so it found another way to get what it wanted." "You need to take Henry home," I said, ignoring the man's chastising comments. I took Henry's car seat from my vehicle and belted him into Matthew's car, and then I turned to face the top of the watchtower. I hadn't seen the looming, slender creature emerge. Is it still up there? I wondered, bracing for the sight of a dark shape on the staircase, but nothing came. "I'm an old man. I don't have much fuel left in the tank, boy. You don't want me to take the reins. I would doom us all to oblivion." "What did I see up there?" I asked, ignoring him. "A tall woman snatched him and—" "A woman?" Matthew asked, eyes wide and lip trembling. "Yes," I said. "Well, something that looked like one." Matthew eyed the watchtower. Before running around to the driver's door of his car, he took one last look at me and uttered a parting warning. "Stay in the woods tonight," he cried hoarsely. "Do not retreat to the watchtower." I watched the man speedily drive away, and I sighed heavily. I cared only that Henry was being taken to safety. But as I stood in the heavy downpour drenched to the bone, I wondered whether I might perish from hypothermia rather than whatever nightmare lurked in the woods. I had given the forest what it wanted. Not fear, it demanded attention. My baby's life had almost been snatched from me. What more could the Highlands want? Surely I had to pay for my crime of neglecting the wretched place over the months. I wished Matthew had told me what would come next. The storm ceased. Not slowly, not naturally. All sound abruptly halted, as did the rain and lightning. The clouds rapidly vanished, giving way to a patch of moonlight on the small clearing in which I found myself. A rumble began beneath my feet, the sound of earth shifting, and then a hand sprouted from the soil before me, the same hand that I had seen earlier in the evening. Spidery fingers shot outwards at a terrifying speed. Before I had a moment to react, the ghoulish palm had planted itself on my face. I sank into blackness. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was in the world of that woman, that thing. And she showed me terrors that even after all these years, I still struggle to put into words. I won't tell you all the things I saw. Some things cannot and should not be seen. She showed me the bodies of my loved ones, such visceral images, almost tangible, and I still remember Maria's face. Tears of blood trickled from her gouged eyes, staining her cheeks. The woman tortured me with these visions for hours. When I woke, I was tucked under a blanket in my car. I panicked for a second, believing that I had shirked my duty, but then I saw Matthew's car beside mine. He was sitting on the bonnet. I emerged from my vehicle on unsteady legs and checked my watch. It was sometime after 7 in the morning. The dawning sun cast a fantastic glow over a forest, which suddenly seemed so calm and soothing. A different realm than the one of the night before. "I found you in the grass," Matthew said. "Thought you'd be more comfortable in the car." I nodded, not willing to thank the man who had sentenced me to this life. "It doesn't have to be this way," I said. "There has to be something that could end all of this." Matthew paused for a long time before saying something utterly unexpected. "You're not the only ranger burdened with this task. This undead affliction is a disease, and it's spreading. There are other villages and hamlets cursed by her." What is she? I asked. Nobody knows. Somebody does, I said. I can't let Henry suffer this fate. I have to find a way to save him. No, I have to find a way to save all of us. Well, I won't be around to see that boy, the old man said. I'm so tired. And after so many years, I'm starting to understand what Matthew meant. It was the 2018 Winter Gathering, a pre-Christmas celebration for the entire village. 150 people packed like sardines in a cozy hall. A night of music, performances, and talks from prominent figures in the village. An amalgamation of festivities. Do you mind doing the thing, honey? I asked Maria. My wife raised her eyebrows suggestively. In the middle of the town hall. I snorted. Not that thing, the back thing. Oh, right, Maria laughed. You're such an old man. I'll be standing up there for ages, I said, shifting uncomfortably in my seat. I don't want to get that annoying knot in the bottom of my spine. You'll be up there 5 minutes tops, she laughed. 36 is painful, huh? You should know, I replied, grinning. I received a thump on my arm, understandably. Make risky jokes and receive fitting results. But Maria chuckled and twisted my torso to the side, before lovingly massaging my shoulders. I locked eyes with the neighbors, Tommy and Maggie, who were sitting a couple of rows behind us. Mags rolled her eyes at me and Tommy rubbed his chin thoughtfully, before whispering something to his wife. She shook her head. Oh look, Tommy said, pointing as the mayor walked towards the stage. It's Mrs. Aver. Oh, stop it. Maggie tutted, slapping her husband's wrist. And now, Peter Tully will say a few words. Mayor Eileen Balfour announced. Put your hands together for our trusty park ranger. I'm not a public speaker, but given the year's events, the villagers were expecting some promising words about the future. Matthew Righted, 1 month prior, passed away, and as much as I loathed the man for tying me to that wretched place, I understood why he had done it. He tried to make amends. He had protected my family over the years. He had even searched for answers that might save the village. After claiming to have given up on the world, he craved redemption in my eyes. Matthew Wright was a desperate man, and I may well have done the same in his shoes. Maria, Henry, and I were the only people beside his hospital bed. A couple of villagers stopped by, of course, but his family had died long ago. He was the last in a long line of Wrights cursed by the Highlands of the dead. Who's gonna keep Dad in line, Uncle Matt? Henry asked. The old man chortled before spiraling into a coughing fit. That's karma, I told him, smiling. He smiled back. It's a shame that we should finally see eye to eye on my deathbed. He croaked, chuckling. And there are, of course, a few things we should discuss before I pass. Maria awkwardly cleared her throat. Come on, Henry. Matthew beamed at my wife and son as they walked out the door. A beautiful family, he said. I nodded. I'm lucky. No, Matthew replied. You were unlucky to meet me. Look at you, you're not a boy anymore. I stole your life from you. I should have. I shook my head. You warned me that there were things you couldn't tell me, dangers in the forest. I heard you and I felt a knot of fear in my gut. I could have listened to that instinct, but I didn't. I was carrying my own trauma. I had something to prove. But you should know that I chose to start a life here and have a family. I'm luckier than most. The old man spluttered. You know, I had a wife once. You never told me that, I said. Matthew shrugged. Long before you arrived in this village, I had already lived a full life. Paisley and I were trying for a baby. What happened? They came at night. Inhuman things from the old factory over the ridge. Nobody really knows what happened there, but we know those things used to be people. And they took her. They took Paisley." The old man cried, and I comfortably placed a hand on his shoulder. "I was a park ranger. I knew about the horrors of the Highlands, of course. It was a secret passed down from the rangers to their kids. Each of us took up the mantle from our parents before us. There were more of us back then. It seems the village gets smaller and smaller with every passing year, and now you're the only ranger left. What comes after you, I don't know, but we mustn't let Henry take your place, Peter. We can't. I won't let him step foot in those woods, but I'm starting to lose hope, Matthew. For years, we've tried to uncover the root of this evil. Your family has been here for generations, and even they don't know what to do. It didn't always used to be so terrible in our village. There were good times before, well, before the heartbreak, the tragedy. As for the land beyond the forest, well, the Highlands of the Dead spread farther than our own patch," he said. "I've told you this before. There will be somebody out there who knows the truth." "How the tables have turned," I replied. "I remember when I was the one trying to convince you to hold on to your hope." "Well, that was before there were people in my life that I could call fit." Matthew started, trailing off before his sentimentality got the better of his Scottish sturdiness. "I'm thinking about what comes after you, Peter. I don't think you've accepted that you won't be here forever." I looked out of the horizontal glass pane between Matthew's room and the waiting area. I could see Maria and Henry talking enigmatically. My son was somehow 12 years old. Time had flitted by at a cruel rate. In my eyes, I was still that 22-year-old boy who moved to the village with dreams of a quiet country life. "Keep searching for the answer, Peter. Remember what you're protecting. But in the event that you should fail, you need to make sure that somebody takes the reins." "No," I said firmly. "I'll be the last park ranger, or at least the last one who does anything other than spotting forest fires and helping hikers." "There we go," Matthew whispered, smiling. "I was worried you had lost that youthful spark for a moment. I don't want you to end up like me, son." I smiled, patting the man's shoulder again before standing up and heading towards the door. "Before you go," he suddenly said, "we're trapped in this village, but help can still come to us." And that was the last thing that he ever said to me. After mulling over Matthew's parting words, I made an arrangement with Mayor Balfour. She, like many others in the village, was aware of what lay in the Highlands. Not all who visit the village become tied to this place. Tourists come and go from time to time, and there are even villagers who have left without resistance. But it is impossible to say who the Highlands will or will not spare. We don't take any risks. We, or those of us who keep this secret, keep our loved ones here. I have spent 20 years convincing Maria to never leave this place. I'm not a good speaker," I said, laughing into the microphone. "But Eileen insisted that I speak to you about a guest." Before I could continue, a chair abruptly squeaked against the floorboards. Heads turned to face a mysterious outsider who strolled down the main aisle. "Hello," the man bellowed, chuckling heartily. "I'll take over, lad. I can see that you don't want to be standing up there. An Englishman in a room full of Scotsmen. Never ends well now, does it?" The room erupted into a chorus of laughter, and I awkwardly shuffled away from the microphone, content to be standing silently alongside Eileen. When the man arrived on the stage, he hopped up with ease. "Good evening, my fellow Highlanders," he roared. "My name is Kieran Green. I come from that little hamlet just over the hills. You might know the one, or maybe you don't because, well, you don't really leave this place, do ya?" I anxiously eyed Eileen, and she nodded her head. We had not come to the decision easily, but it was time to do things differently from those who had come before us. I just dreaded how my wife and son would react to Kieran's announcement. The man sighed, planting his hands on the podium before him. You see, there's something that many of you know, something that you've not wanted to tell your loved ones, a secret of the land passed from generation to generation, and I know all about that. These highlands have been host to many a sorry sight. See, our hamlet used to be much bigger, but then they came, dark things in the night. They killed our family and friends, and we swore that it would never happen again. We realized that secrets would kill us all. A hushed wave of whispers spread through the hallway, and I locked eyes with Maria. "What's happening?" she mouthed at me. I had no response. "There's a special duty performed by the park rangers of this village. Well, the sole remaining ranger, and it doesn't involve spotting fires or herding sheep. It's... some things are better left unsaid." Tommy suddenly shouted, rising to his feet. "Stop making a scene, Tommy," Maggie begged. "I'm protecting you, dear," he said before looking at the crowd. "Yes, there are things that happen in those woods, but the people of this village don't need to know about them." "Wrong," Kieran shouted, silencing my neighbor. "Some of you may have seen things that you couldn't explain. Perhaps you have dismissed those things, but judging by the look on your faces, I would say not. You are not safe, and I ask again, how many of you have left this place?" The room fell silent. "Aye," Kieran nodded. "And how many of you stay because at some point in your youth, somebody warned you not to leave?" I saw faces twist and turn, families eyed one another suspiciously. Eileen's husband cast a disparaging glare in her direction. Maria surveyed me with teary eyes. "I do not blame your village for spending a century concealing this treacherous truth," he said. "But we have watched tragedy after tragedy befall our land, have we not? And with each fresh horror, the darkness grows." "Why now?" a woman cried from the crowd. "Why tell us after all these years?" Kieran turned to face me. "Ask the park ranger." I eyed the vicious mob sitting in the hall. Maria couldn't even look at me. Henry maintained his composure, but the color had drained from the little boy's face. "I made a decision," I said. "A decision backed by Matthew Wright himself." "Don't bring his name into this," a man snarled. "You're not one of us." "Yes, we are," Henry screamed, attempting to stand. Maria held him down. "Matthew and I have seen things that most of you would never understand," I continued, striving to hide my unsteady disposition. "And we've decided to break the cycle." "Please, Mark," Tommy said with tearful eyes. "Enough, you've said your piece, it's done now." I shook my head. "It isn't done, and it'll never be done. Do you want to know what lies in that forest? The dead are dead, and we will continue to feed these highlands for as long as we do nothing. Look at our children, do they deserve this?" "There's nothing that can be done," an old woman called. "All who tried have died." "Not true," Kieran interrupted, pushing me aside and leaning towards the microphone. "I have tried, Peter has tried, and we're still here. We know about the woods, the highlands of the dead, but we keep to ourselves and nothing bad happens," a man shouted. "Oh, sir, bad things happen all the time," Kieran said coldly. "Peter Tully has been giving his soul to the woods for 14 years. He's a shell of a man, look at him, and he does it for you. And if he were to stop, well, the forest would have to look elsewhere to feast on souls." "Something has cursed this land," I interjected. "We don't know what lies at the heart of the highlands. It wears many faces and takes many forms. All we know is that it never stops," Kieran finished. "Mark, I understand that you want to protect us," Tommy said, "but my mother told me things that, look, it's just we can't fight it. Natural or unnatural, the might of the highlands will always best us." "I'm not going to let this place take my boy," I whispered, eyeing Henry. Maria lifted her eyes to meet mine. They were brimming with tears, but she met my gaze, and that was something. Kieran patted my back and took over. "I visited one of the lake towns recently, saw an old friend of my grandfather. He told me a story about a witch. Oh, come on, a man sighed. Listen, boy, Kieran spat. You don't want to test me. I'll drag you down to the forest myself and show you the... Kieran Green paused, collecting himself. All that matters is there might be a way to lift this curse, to free you from the death hanging over this place. Peter Tully and I will go to the woods tonight and we will end this. But if we don't, well, at least you will know the truth, and somebody brave can take up the mantle. It never should have been Peter's cross to carry. Matthew Wright forced him here, and... Let's not speak ill of the dead, I said, sensing the hollow atmosphere in the hall. Before I go... Where are you going? Maria cried in a flood of tears. We'll talk later, I said. Look after Henry. All will be well, Kieran promised, ushering me towards him. We will gather here in the morning. The crowd talked restlessly and Eileen rushed to the microphone as Kieran and I slipped out of a back door. I saw Henry standing and watching me with a lost expression. That went about as well as expected. Kieran sat unlocking his vehicle. I sighed, climbing into the passenger seat. Just go. As we tore off the tarmac, a few villagers poured out of the front doors and watched us drive away. They were never going to accept it. They've always known deep down, but they didn't want to know. Would you have done what I did? I asked. I already have, the man sighed. I had a smaller crowd to appease, a mind. Well, they deserved to know a long time ago, I said. Well, ignorance is bliss, Kieran replied. But we don't have that luxury in the Highlands. I learned that the hard way. He took a dirt road into the thick of the woods. I frowned. I usually turn a little farther up the main. We all learn hard lessons, Kieran said, interrupting me. My hamlet used to be a village roughly the size of yours, but that all changed when the creatures came. Matthew told you all about it, didn't he? Yeah, the incident at the factory, I said, frowning. But this road is the... And it wouldn't have happened if everybody had known. Kieran interrupted a second time. Since then, every time the creatures come, and they always come, my neighbors know what to do. Of course, they don't know what I do to keep them safe. There are still some secrets that we must carry to the grave. Isn't that right, Park Ranger? He slowed to a stop and secured the handbrake. We were sitting in the middle of the forest. What are you trying to say, Kieran? I asked, unsettled by his shifting demeanor. The man sighed. I wasn't going to come here without a plan, Park Ranger. And do you know what I found when I did a little background research on you? Terrible story from London. A newspaper article about a police officer who fumbled negotiations with a robber. Do you ever dream of that little girl, Peter? The one who died as a result of your miscalculation. I clenched my fists. It wasn't like that. I didn't know that he would shoot. But it's no secret, the whole city knew. That's why we moved to a place in which nobody knew your name, Kieran asked. Why are you doing this? Do you not trust me? Is that the problem? I want the same thing that you want. Oh, I know you do, Peter. And aren't the Highlands lucky to have such a brave Englishman on their side? He's come to save the day. We Scottish peasants would be lost without you. I don't really care about your ancient prejudice. Let's just finish this, and... The sudden blow to my temple sent a ripple of pain through my body. Acting on impulse rather than any conscious form of thought, I scrambled for the car door's handle and fell onto the forest floor. Prejudice, it's not as personal as that, Kieran said, stepping out of the driver's side. I mean, I hate the English, don't get me wrong. But this isn't some meaningless act, no, this is about the survival of my people. I groaned, clutching the side of my head and stumbling shakily to my feet. The vision in my right eye was uneven and blurry. My left eye was just as useless as ever, but I could vaguely distinguish Kieran approaching with a torch in his hand, the blunt instrument that he had used to attack me. I don't know how to stop any of this, Kieran admitted, but I do know how to give the woods what it wants, and it's been craving you for a long time. I think it might finally spare my hamlet. All I have to do is give you to it. So I didn't lie, Peter, not really. This is for the greater good. I stumbled to the side, supporting my weight in the car. What about this village? There are people of the Highlands too. Kieran shrugged, striding towards me. Not my people. Concussed and nearly blind, I raised an arm to defend myself. But Kieran swiftly bludgeoned my face a second time, and I fell to the ground in agony. Spitting teeth and blood into the dirt, I tried to crawl away. Family, Peter, he said. You understand, don't you? That's what it's all about. I told you I don't care about Scotland or England. I just care about my own flesh and blood. I've got 2 boys at home, so try to understand that. I rolled onto my back, propping my body against a nearby tree. The wind picked up and I heard strange guttural noises from the earth below us. It's almost time, Kieran said, raising his torch one last time. The forest will be so thankful that I brought you. You have saved people, Peter, just not your people. Barely clinging to consciousness, I spat blood at his feet and the man laughed. Aye, I'll give you that one, Englishman, he said, patting the red specks on his trouser legs. And don't worry, I'll make this quick, I promise. I'm a man of my word. I croakily laughed. You're no man. Kieran scowled, raising his torch to finish the job. I closed my eyes and awaited the embrace of darkness. I could only see Maria and Henry. I prayed that they would find a way to free themselves of the Highlands. I didn't want their forgiveness, just their safety. A thud sounded, but I didn't feel a thing. And when I opened my eyes, I found myself facing an unlikely sight. Tommy Buchanan. He was towering over Kieran's crumpled body, and there was a shovel in his hands. A shovel which he promptly dropped to the ground before rushing over to me. He's no man, and he's certainly no Scotsman. Come on, Peter, I parked a dozen yards down the dirt track, he said, panting as he reached down and hoisted me to my feet. Let's get you to the hospital. I hobbled to the car, supporting my weakening body on Tommy's shoulders. Adrenaline kept me awake, but that was a good thing. I didn't want to pass out with a head injury. I closed the door and Tommy rushed to the driver's side. As his body flitted past the windscreen, I squinted, desperately trying to discern a moving shape at the edge of the tree line. Kieran. Drive, I cried as Tommy clambered into the car. Kieran threw his body onto the bonnet. His bloody, bruised face matched my own. Watch out, I cried as Tommy rapidly reversed the car. The rear bumper collided with a sturdy tree trunk, and Kieran crumpled into the windscreen. I'll kill you both, he said in a half-conscious grumble while weakly pounding the glass. As Tommy reached for the door handle, the wind began to wail shrilly, and then, in a flash of movement, Kieran's body was torn from the front of the car. Tommy and I watched in confusion as a shape rose from the dirt, a horrifyingly tall specter with the faint shape of a woman. But it was not human. I had seen horrors like it before. The undead entity meshed seamlessly with the forest ground, and its branch-like arms seized Kieran by the throat. Something about her was different from the other creatures that I had seen in the Highlands. The tattered clothes, they were so familiar. Mercy, Tommy whispered. It can't be. What? I asked, head falling apart at the seams. Shirley Pond, he said. I recognized that name. I hadn't heard it since the day that I had moved to the village. 14 years earlier, Matthew had told me about a park ranger who had disappeared in the woods, the one who came before me. My friend furiously revved the engine and beelined for the main road. We left Kieran and the undead spirit of Shirley Pond behind. Since that first night in the forest, I've always suspected that it might have been her whose gnarled, rotting hand saved me from the schoolteacher. But I do not know for certain. But I know that she saved Tommy and me. Today the village faced its demons. 5 years had passed since Kieran Green took me to the forest. A lifetime in so many ways. The world has endured wars and a pandemic, but that reality seems so distant and detached from our village's bubble. Since that momentous winter gathering, The villagers have reconciled with one another. Maria and I work together now. I have promised to be a better partner. An arduous road led to that juncture. You see, it was never a question of whether I had told the truth in that town meeting. Nobody doubted the insidious nature of the Highlands. Even those who had never ever walked the woods. We had all seen things. We had all felt things. No, this was about forgiving deceit, more than overcoming disbelief. Following my brush with death, Tommy accompanied me on my shifts, though Maggie didn't like him doing so. I wasn't keen on the old man doing it either. His arthritis was worsening, but he insisted that somebody needed to look after me. He still views me as the boy that he met 20 years ago. Speaking of which, Henry is 16 now, an adult apparently. Then again, I shouldn't tease him. Maria and I were only 6 years older than him when we moved to this place. A horrifying thought. This morning, as I sat in my watchtower and basked in the warm glow of the sunrise, a sudden knock jolted me from my chair. I spilled my cup of tea and I sighed heavily, before swiveling around to face the door. Outside the window there stood a man that I didn't recognize. "May I enter?" he called. The man spoke with an English accent which left me leery. "Not until I know your name and why you're here," I said, reaching for Matthew's old revolver beneath my desk. Not a legal firearm, of course, but my duties aren't exactly the same as those of normal rangers. "You don't know me, but my name's Darren Grayson and I came across your story. I can help." I had heard that before. "May I enter?" he asked again. "Yes," I said, warily sliding the gun under my jacket. Darren opened the door and shuffled inside. He was around my age and he bore a similar tired and disheveled look, scruffy facial hair, crooked crow's feet. The man sat on the edge of my desk a few feet from me, and I surveyed him curiously. "What are you doing here, Darren Grayson?" I asked. "I come from a hamlet over the ridge," he replied, pointing out of the watchtower window. "And it—" "Get out," I coldly interrupted, sliding the weapon from my coat. Darren's eyes widened and he quickly slid off the desk. "Come to avenge Kieran, is that it?" I asked, narrowing my eyes and raising the revolver. "Kieran?" Darren asked. "How do you know that name?" "Your friend came here 5 years ago," I muttered. "He had promised to save my village too." Darren raised his hands. "Listen, I don't know what happened, but Kieran was a very dangerous man." "Please leave," I said. "When you shared your story with the world, it found its way to me," Darren continued. "I'm not going to tell you again," I hissed. "He's dead, Peter," Darren said. "Kieran's dead." "I know," I replied. "Shirley Pond killed him." "What?" Darren asked. "No, he died a year ago. He tried to sacrifice me to the forest folk, but they claimed him." "He made it back to the hamlet," I replied, eyes wide. "Yes, why does it matter? He's dead. I saw it happen," Darren replied. "Well, that's what I thought too," I said. Darren paused for a moment. "I have good reason to believe that this time he died for good. That's why I'm here, Peter. The forest folk have perished." "The old factory workers?" I asked. Darren nodded. "It happened in early spring. I sounded the alarm when they had emerged from the forest, but they collapsed in the snow. One by one, we watched their bodies for days, waiting for signs of movement. They slowly started to rot, and then, with unnatural haste, the forest reclaimed them. It was like nothing that I had ever seen." "What does this have to do with Kieran's death?" I asked. "Something came from the forest, Peter. A skeletal thing," Darren said. "The woman," I whispered, shaking. "Woman?" he asked. "No, it wasn't anything remotely resembling a man or a woman. It was a body constructed of entwined branches. It whispered to me, "The rotten seed has been purged from this land." I paused. "Kieran?" "Kieran," Darren agreed. "No single thing poisoned our land. This infection has festered for a century or more, worsened by tragedy after tragedy. Perhaps since people first had settled in the Highlands. Perhaps it infects all places to some degree, and it spreads by people," I finished. Darren nodded. "People. Perhaps in our 2 hometowns we have been misfortunate enough to experience one too many tragedies. The Greens had a long history of causing pain and suffering. It began long before Kieran. It was his great-grandfather who ran the factory, Lachlan Green, a tyrant who employed young boys and girls for a pittance. He forced them to work in terrible conditions, no sunlight, little food. Many of the children developed rickets, and when they died a young unnatural death, the forest claimed them. They joined the legions of undead and they were sentenced to an afterlife in the Highlands. Most likely they came to our hamlet seeking revenge for Lachlan Green's injustice. They only ever wanted his great-grandson," I said. Darren nodded. "Yes, and after they were finally laid to rest, I could have left the Highlands with my family. But our hamlet has become a quiet, beautiful place. It was only when you shared your tale of horror that I realized this disease spreads beyond the ridge." "So you think something rotten lives in this village?" I asked. The man nodded. "There was the school teacher who killed those children," I started. "Arnold Haversham," Darren asked. "Well, he's dead. He died nearly 30 years ago." I stalled, rubbing my chin thoughtfully. "Like you said, it's never one thing that poisons a land. It's generational trauma." Darren nodded. "Arnold mustn't have been the only evil at work. But I know these people, they're neighbors and friends. I don't want to imagine a wolf living among us," I said. "Well, Kieran was a beloved leader," Darren explained. "Dark things always hide in plain sight. The things I see in these woods are so often tied to that school," I said. "Nearly every night I see that building amidst the trees." "Somebody in this town knows something," Darren said. I recalled a detail that had played on my mind for years. A joke that Tommy had made during that meeting in 2018, before Maggie had interrupted him. He was on the verge of calling the mayor Mrs. Aversham. I was certain of it. "Come on," I said. "We're going to see a friend." "Oh," Darren replied, climbing to his feet. "I think he might know something about the people that Arnold left behind," I explained. We drove back to the village and I anxiously twiddled my thumbs as we pulled onto Tommy's driveway. I didn't want to apprehend the man, but time was slipping through our fingers. Too many decades had been spent under the gnarled, decaying thumbnail of whatever lived beneath the Highlands. "I don't know why I said that about Eileen," Tommy nervously stuttered. "It was a dumb joke to make." "What was the joke?" I asked. The man sighed exasperatedly. "Who's your friend?" "Darren Grayson," my companion replied, outstretching his hand. "Oh, great," Tommy laughed. "It's a bloomin' invasion of English folk." "Tommy, tell me what you know," I said. "Nothing, Peter, it was a joke," he insisted. "Mrs. Aversham, was she married to Arnold Aversham?" I asked. Tommy laughed and then he immediately stopped himself upon seeing my face. "Why's that so funny?" I asked. The man paused for a second before sighing. "It took me back to my days on the force. Investigating crimes, Tommy was a lovely man, but he didn't perform well under pressure. My persistence finally wore him down. I've still got it," I thought to myself. "Eileen was Arnold's sister," he muttered. "She changed her name after, everything. We all loved her, so we never blamed her for it. We made her the mayor for crying out loud. Is she his only surviving family? I inquired. What's the use in dredging up the past, Peter? Tommy asked. Well, there might be a way to end all of this, I said. The man eyed me uncertainly. I sighed. 30 years have passed since Arnold Aversham took those lives, but the evil in the forest lingers, and it won't extinguish until we stamp out every last weed. Weed? Tommy asked. What are you saying? He's saying that evil lives here, Darren said, right in the heart of your village. Tommy scoffed. You believe this, do you, Peter? One of our friends, perhaps somebody in one of our families. That school has haunted the forest for decades, I said. It calls to me there has to be a reason for that. There has to be something that we missed. Arnold Aversham is dead, Tommy said. What more is there to say? A terrible thing happened and the forest hasn't forgotten that. Trauma stains the Highlands of the dead. That's how you've always explained it, Peter. Well, what do I know? What do any of us know? I replied. But if Darren's story about lifting the curse happens to be true, it is true, Darren promised. Well, I said, I think we should go and talk to the mayor. Tommy sighed. It's not Eileen who can help you. Well, then who can help us? I asked. The man cleared his throat. Her mother, Geraldine Aversham. She's still alive? I asked incredulously. He nodded. Aye, she keeps to herself. Old Victorian built by the lake at the forest edge. You know the one. That rundown shack off the A road, I said. It always looked abandoned to me. Haunted. Might as well be. Nobody but Eileen has seen Geraldine since Arnold did those terrible things. She doesn't speak. Doesn't even eat without assistance. There's nothing but a ghost in her place, Tommy said. It's a sad thing. She was the heart and soul of the village for many years. We all miss her too. But Eileen says her mother just won't face the world. So she probably wouldn't talk to us, Darren asked. Tommy shook his head. We have to try, I said. With Tommy anxiously watching from the driveway, Darren and I hopped into the car, and we drove to the lake. Before today, I hardly had noticed the Victorian heritage of the ramshackle abode. There was nothing grand or glamorous about the neglected home. It was little more than a forgotten farmhouse, an eyesore that I had never inspected during my 20 years in the Highlands. A feeble structure held together by flimsy foundations, much like everything and everyone in the village. That's Eileen's car, I said as Darren parked alongside a gray Range Rover. It might be for the best that she's here, Darren said, removing the key from the ignition. You know Eileen, she might be able to get Geraldine to talk. Yeah, I said. As we exited the vehicle, nerves constricted my gut. I eyed the ancient house with mistrust, gingerly treading on cracked and grass-ridden stonework. We stepped onto the wooden porch before Geraldine's door, and it was not just the rickety, unreliable floorboards that filled me with unease. It was the atmosphere of our mid-afternoon house call. The lake was unnervingly still, but the woods swayed unstably, beckoning us to enter. I couldn't imagine living at the foot of the frightful forest by choice. Darren knocked on Geraldine's door and we waited for several minutes. Maybe we should. When Eileen answered, she was flustered and horrified to see us. Peter, who is this? She asked. Darren Grayson, he comes from the hamlet beyond the ridge and tease. You got a lot of nerve, Eileen interjected, eyeing Darren coldly. Kieran Green tried to condemn the people of this village too. I know, Darren said. I know that, Mayor Balfour. But he's gone now and we can fix everything. Our hamlet is free of the dead. My phone buzzed and I pulled it out of my pocket while the pair continued talking. It was Maria. I thought. I forgot to take Henry to school. I hurriedly texted my wife to apologize and I explained that I was at Geraldine Aversham's house. She replied to say that Henry was already having a bad day. He was worried about the future, university, something that he would never get to experience if he was truly trapped in the village forever. "Everything okay, Peter?" Darren asked. "Yeah, it can wait," I said, putting my phone back in my pocket. "Did you explain everything?" "It's not happening, Peter," Eileen insisted. "My mother won't talk to you. She doesn't talk to anyone." "If we could just see her," I started. "I said no," Eileen shouted, slamming the door in our faces. "Well, that was odd," Darren said, sighing. "Another dead end." I didn't spend many years as a police officer before moving to the Highlands. I would hardly call myself a world-renowned detective, and yet it was undeniable. "Eileen is hiding something," I said. Darren frowned. "Is she not just being protective? Her family has gone through a lot." "No," I replied, shaking my head. Her demeanor was off, and I'm thinking about what Tommy said. Geraldine was a beloved member of the community, and she's lived as a social recluse for nearly 30 years. No friends or family to visit her. "Grief is a wretched thing," Darren said, sighing. "I don't deny that, but I think Tommy and the other villagers buy that tale, but..." "You don't trust Eileen," Darren said. "No," I replied. And the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that I had never really trusted her. There had always been something evasive about the woman. She was a person of few words, a select few words. As Darren and I stood on the porch contemplating our next move, a creak sounded from the rear of the house, the sound of a door opening. "Reckon that's her?" Darren asked. "Only one way to know for sure," I said, motioning for the neighborhood watchman to follow me. As we crept around the side of the derelict house, I noticed a large window coated in assorted forms of overgrowth. I'm not sure what possessed me, but it was more than piqued curiosity. I found myself tearing the vines in the shrubbery away, and then I began to scrub the window's filth with the sleeve of my jacket. "Darren," I whispered, "you might want to see this." Through a cleaned loophole I had formed in the center of the glass pane, we could see Geraldine's living room. It was illuminated by the midday sunlight, and on a dusty, neglected armchair, there sat a pile of ashy clothes with the vague posture of a sitting person. "Is that..." Darren started quivering. "Geraldine Aversham," I said. Darren and I did not say any more than that. We raced into the forest, keenly pursuing Eileen. She fled at a quickened pace, but her footsteps betrayed her, and when we had reached a sprawling clearing in the woods, I knew that we had found her secret. "What is that?" Darren asked breathlessly. "The entrance to Hades," I said. The ground had parted to reveal horrors in the hollow beneath, just as it did 20 years ago. And buried amongst mounds of soil and rocks, the twisted version of the village school stared back at us. It did not rise proudly above the tree line as it once had. It was a sunken wreckage hiding in an inexplicable chasm. The building lay on its back with its front doors facing the sky. "Wait," Darren said as I jumped into the ditch. "What are you doing?" I carefully tiptoed across the building, gulping as the brickwork groaned beneath my feet. "She's in here," I said, pointing at muddy footprints across the wooden doors. "I know, but don't open those doors, are you crazy?" he asked. "Nothing is ever as it seems in this forest," I said, smiling and stamping. The doors swung open and I fell forwards, but I did not endlessly plummet through a downwards-facing corridor. Gravity shifted and I tumbled to the tiled floor of the haunted and lightless school. When I turned to look at the doors behind me, motion sickness seized my body. There was something truly ghastly about seeing the trees and the sky at a right angle. It was made all the worse by Darren's sideways body sliding into view. The man sighed and climbed down the hole. He tumbled through the doorway and fell onto his face. I feel a little sick, Darren muttered as we both stumbled to our feet. Then don't look behind you, I said, nodding my head at the doors. As I started to walk down the corridor, I heard the man pivot to see what I meant, and he swiftly retched on the floor. Consumed by the building's darkness, I fumbled in my coat pocket to find my torch, and when I lit up the hallway, I was 20 years younger. My mind returned to that very first night in the Highlands, nothing more than a frightened boy in a haunted house. After so many years, the terror had still not abated. Some horrors lie beyond what our primal brains can conceive. We strode cautiously through the school, following the trail of mud down a weaving maze of hallways. And then we came to that door, that horrible door. Classroom 11A. There was movement inside. I turned off the flashlight and I motioned for Darren to crouch down. They want to ruin everything, my darling. A voice sobbed from inside the room. Darren and I peeked over the bottom of the classroom window. Eileen was inside, but that wasn't what terrified us. She was talking to a looming ghoul, a corpse that I recognized. Arnold Aversham. The malformed monstrosity that had caused so much death and suffering. And as it leaned towards Eileen, its voice carried in an inaudible, unearthly tone. I know, my love, I'll bring you more little ones, I promise, she cooed, stroking her undead brother's cheek. But things have been difficult. That same icy, inhuman whisper sounded. Yes, Arnold, the ranger. He's brought someone to the village and... Another whisper sharply sliced into her sentence. Oh, Eileen said. I see. And then her eyes shot to the window. She and her haunted sibling looked at Darren and me with equally black and lifeless eyes. Before we could rise to our feet, Arnold's arms had elongated. The door was wrenched from its hinges and our bodies were dragged into the classroom by the murderous schoolteacher's undead fingers. He held us down as the mare walked over to our writhing bodies. The withered, gray-haired woman sighed before squatting to my eye level. Do you love your family, Peter? She asked. Would you do anything for them? I have always loved my brother. Nobody else did. Not the father who left us. Not our insufferable goody-two-shoes mother. Even when Arnold became a school teacher, following in her footsteps, he still wasn't good enough. But we had silenced her ceaseless, chattering and nagging, now didn't we, Arnold? You're unwell, Eileen, I croaked, as Arnold's terrifying figures constricted my breath. That's what they all said to my sweet brother, she moaned, clenching her fists. I mean, yes, he struggled to socialize. He didn't want to wear the mask that was thrust upon him, but he was different and he was pure. And those children... Ghostly muffled wails sounded beyond the walls. They were spoiled brats, Eileen snarled. They should have been honored that Arnold chose them. They were the purest of the bunch, and he wanted to be with them forever. What purer love can there be? As for you... The woman walked over to Darren Grayson. The cleanser of the Highlands. Death follows in your wake now, doesn't it, Mr. Grayson? But your story ends here. This is our land, she shrieked, clasping her hands around Darren's throat. And when I'm done with the two of you, I'll pay a visit to your little hamlet, Mr. Grayson. Perhaps you have some pretty young playthings for my beautiful brother. In a sudden blur of motion, Darren plunged a knife into Eileen's abdomen. I hadn't seen his arm wriggle free of its restraints. The deranged woman howled in excruciating pain, clutching her wounded torso and stumbling backwards. Her inhuman brother released us and he rushed to his sister's aid, cradling her in his rotting arms. Darren and I quickly scrambled to our feet. Is it over? I asked, backing towards the door. If she dies, Darren replied, joining me. The forest needs to be freed from. The forest? Eileen spluttered, laughing. I've never understood this fascination with trees and earth. I am the Highlands. Before we could respond, a sinister spectacle unfolded. Arnold Aversham's deformed body enveloped Eileen. His rotten flesh merged with hers, and the pair formed a singular abomination of decay and evil. I recognized the outline of the monstrosity before me. The horror that had dropped my baby from the watchtower. Had my boy been intended as a prize for her brother? The 10-foot-tall entity lumbered towards us on twitching, near-fleshless legs. Its giant form was bent sideways as it could scarcely fit in the room, and it only kept growing. Darren and I ran. "I'm out of ideas, Peter," the man cried as we sprinted down the corridor. "Yep," I shouted in response. The creature was pursuing without pause for breath, and its nearing growls made it quite apparent that we were not going to escape. It was too fast, but as we neared the school's entryway, I became aware of the floor's dampness. "Peter," Darren started. "I know," I replied. "It smells like petrol." And as we turned onto the final stretch of the corridor facing the outer world, I saw something entirely unexpected. In the entrance of the school, silhouetted by the day's dying light, a man and a woman stood anxiously. I could only distinguish their outlines, but I knew who they were. "Is that Tommy?" "And Maria," I said. "Hurry," Tommy yelled. Before I could respond, I was swept from my feet. My body somersaulted into the school lockers like a limp ragdoll, and my revolver clattered to the floor. I looked up at the enormous annihilator, the monster that had tormented our village for 30 years. A monster, it seemed, of two halves. Two monstrous siblings. It had to die. And as I lay in a thick trail of petrol, I started to piece together the plan that Tommy and Maria had made. When we were clear of the school, they planned to set the building ablaze. However, Darren didn't run towards the exit. He beelined for the revolver. "Get out of here," I cried. The Aversham abomination clutched Darren by the neck and hoisted him into the air. I saw the fear in the man's eyes as the unholy monster began howling in his face. Not wasting a moment, I stumbled to my feet and scooped up the firearm, before aiming at the creature's arm. I prayed that I wouldn't miss. I prayed that I wouldn't hit Darren by mistake. After removing the safety, I fired. The Aversham creature screeched in agony, and its fingers reflexively released Darren's neck. "Come on," I shouted, pulling the man to his feet. We scurried towards the exit, and I could see Maria fiddling with something. Our trusty lighter from back home. Not so trusty these days, I remembered. I had watched both Tommy and my wife fiddle with the device, while sweat dripped down their faces. When Darren and I reached the entrance and we turned to face the Avershams, the seemingly unwounded monster hurtled towards us. "Peter!" Tommy cried. The darkened, unnaturally long limb had silently spiraled around the corridor, merging with the forest's overgrowth. I hadn't seen it slither towards me, but I felt it yank my body to the ground. My revolver flew from my hand and the beast began to pull me into its domain. "Peter!" Maria screamed, bending to pick up my dropped weapon. "Let him go!" A gunshot rang out, tearing into the creature's deteriorating flesh. I used the split-second distraction to stamp on the monster's arm, and it loosened its undead fingers, freeing me from its grip. I shuffled backwards, joining the others at the entrance. Maria fired again. The second bullet didn't connect with the monster, but she wasn't aiming for it. The petrol trail burst into flames, and the fire spread at such speed that the Avershams were already engulfed before they could screech in terror. We carefully backed out of the school, tumbling to the safety blanket of the forest floor, and I breathed a sigh of relief to find myself facing the right way up. Gravity had been restored. The four of us watched the inferno consume the school. Wallpaper withered, ceilings collapsed, and the shrieking abomination fell to its knees. A raging fire burnt that unhallowed place to charred ruins. We waited. None of us believed it would be over until the monstrosity had been turned to ash. And then, when nothing of the Aversham abomination remained, the ground began to quake. The four of us stepped back, allowing the forest to reseal above the spectral school. Dirt piled into the cavity, grass rebuilt itself, and the air warmed. The Highlands felt quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. "Look," Darren whispered, pointing at movement in the trees. A branch-like entity had emerged, and it was followed by a blinding ray of sunlight like a heavenly being. The phantom had matched the description of the phenomena that Darren had described, the being that came after the cleansing of his hamlet. With trepidation, we watched the woodland creature slink into the empty clearing. It eyed us with what I presumed to be its face, and then it ceremoniously planted its roots into the soil. Slowly but surely, the creature transformed into a large pine tree. It sprouted luscious green leaves and bloomed vibrantly. The proud pine rose a foot taller than the surrounding trees, and its colorful leaves distinguished it from the rest of the barren and wintry forest. The freshly grown tree lightened the air. A hard thing to explain, but it did just that. The weightiness of the forest had lifted. "I feel freer," Tommy said. "Thank you," I whispered to my wife, embracing her. "It's over, we can live again," she tearfully said. I pray that this marks a new chapter for our village. These will always be the Highlands of the dead, but the dead can finally rest.